Hey guys, tonight we're going back to a version of England that has not quite finished becoming England yet. There are no stone castles looming over every hill, no village pub serving Sunday lunch, no tea, no potatoes, no chiming church clocks, and absolutely nobody has heard the phrase central heating. What you have instead is timber, mud, wool, smoke, livestock, Christianity, family obligations, armed Scandinavians, and a political situation that could reasonably be described as developing. We're going to England in the year 878, or, to be more accurate, we're going to Wessex, because England as a single unified kingdom does not exist yet. Several of the Old English kingdoms have already been conquered or broken by Scandinavian armies. Mercia has been badly mauled. Northumbria is under Scandinavian control. East Anglia has fallen. And Wessex, the last major independent English kingdom, is currently being held together by King Alfred, several exhausted noblemen, a large quantity of mud, and what appears from a modern perspective to be unreasonable optimism. This is Alfred before centuries of school books turn him into Alfred the Great. Right now he is simply Alfred, a king in his late 20s who has spent an uncomfortable proportion of his adult life discovering Vikings in places where he would strongly prefer there not to be Vikings. An ordinary life continues around all of this. That is really what makes 878 so fascinating. Somewhere a king is hiding in the marshes, while the survival of his kingdom hangs in the balance. But somewhere else a woman is grinding grain because everyone still needs breakfast. A farmer is repairing a fence. A child is carrying water. Someone is worrying about a cow. Someone else is wondering whether the neighbour has stolen a pig. History may be collapsing dramatically in the distance, but the porridge still needs stirring. If you're enjoying the channel, please like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually want to. No pressure. It genuinely helps more than you might think. And drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. There is something deeply reassuring about knowing that while we are wandering through a smoky 9th century farmhouse, somebody somewhere is listening at 2 a.m. with a fan pointed directly at their face. Also, the channel is on Spotify, so if you'd rather listen there, you'll find the link in the description. Now, dim the lights, put a fan on if you've got one, pull the blanket up, find that mysteriously perfect sleeping position that you will immediately ruin by moving your foot in approximately 30 seconds. Get truly comfortable, because tonight we're going to find out what ordinary existence actually felt like while Alfred was desperately trying to prevent Wessex from becoming somebody else's property. What does your house smell like when the fire burns indoors all day? What exactly are you sleeping on? How many hours of human labour are hiding inside one woolen tunic? What does breakfast look like when virtually everything on the table had to be grown, raised, gathered, ground, fermented, salted, dried, or personally argued out of the ground? What happens when the king suddenly needs you for military service during the farming season? How do you get news when there are no newspapers, no postal service, and the fastest source of information may be a tired man arriving on horseback with terrible news? And if you become ill, who exactly is treating you, and how worried should you be when they begin confidently collecting herbs? Most importantly, what does an ordinary day feel like when a Scandinavian army might be several days away, several miles away, or standing in the next settlement before anyone has had time to update you? Congratulations, you've just woken up in Wessex. The year is 878. King Alfred is fighting for his kingdom. Guthrum's army is about to make his life significantly worse. Your house is made mostly from timber, your breakfast requires manual grain processing, and somewhere outside a chicken has already begun shouting for reasons known only to itself. Welcome to Alfred's England. Technically, your morning has begun. 1. You wake up in a house made mostly of timber, smoke, and other people. Let's start with your house, because calling it your bedroom would create expectations that 9th century architecture has absolutely no intention of meeting. You wake inside a timber building, probably rectangular, with walls built from wooden framing and materials such as wattle and daub, beneath a roof that may be thatched. The floor beneath you is likely beaten earth. There is no plastered hallway, no staircase, no spare room that somebody has converted into a home office. Domestic life is concentrated into a small number of intensely used spaces where sleeping, eating, working, storing things, talking, repairing equipment, and quietly resenting relatives can all happen within conversational distance of the same fire. Privacy is not really a feature of the building. Privacy is something you achieve by everybody else politely becoming interested in another part of the room. The first thing you notice is the air. It is thick with the remains of yesterday. Wood smoke hangs beneath the roof. The hearth has been burning for hours, perhaps days with careful tending, and although smoke can escape through openings in the building, it does not always leave with the efficiency you might personally prefer. Some of it drifts upward, some of it finds the doorway, some of it simply settles into the roof timbers, the woolen clothing, the bedding, your hair, and apparently your entire personality. You smell of home because home smells of smoke. There are advantages. Smoke discourages some insects, helps preserve parts of the building, and accompanies the fire that is keeping everyone warm. The difficulty is that you are also breathing it. Your eyes may sting when the fire misbehaves. The air grows hazy when the weather prevents good ventilation. A modern smoke detector would have resigned before breakfast. Then there are the other people. An ordinary household may include parents, children, relatives, servants, dependents, and workers connected to the household economy. Exactly who sleeps under your roof depends on wealth and status, but the basic point remains that houses are social spaces. You are not retreating to your private bedroom at 9:30 with a book and a glass of water. You are retreating several feet toward the place where you sleep while continuing to hear everything everyone else is doing. Someone coughs. A child turns over. Somebody begins moving near the hearth. Someone else is already awake because medieval morning routines have no respect whatsoever for your desire to remain under the blanket. The floor is cold. The fire is warmer. This explains much of the building's geography. People gather around the hearth because warmth is concentrated there, and the farther you move from it, the more aggressively England reminds you what climate you live in. During winter, drafts find gaps in walls and doors with astonishing professional skill. Wattle and daub can provide effective shelter when maintained properly, but this is still a building made from natural materials exposed constantly to rain, wind, damp, insects, animals, and human activity. Maintenance never really finishes. A section of wall cracks, so someone repairs it. Thatch deteriorates, so someone patches it. Timber rots. Pegs loosen, floors become uneven, mud arrives on footwear, ash escapes the hearth. The roof acquires opinions. Your home is not purchased once and then quietly expected to remain a home. It survives because the household keeps making it survive. And almost everything inside is valuable precisely because it took labour to produce. Wooden chests store clothing and possessions. Pottery holds food and drink. Iron tools represent skill and expense. Textiles are especially precious because spinning and weaving consume enormous quantities of time. There is very little clutter in the modern sense, because owning unnecessary objects requires first having the resources to make or acquire unnecessary objects. Your house is therefore simpler than a modern home, but it is not empty. It is dense with useful things, and smells. Smoke, wool, earth, food, leather, damp timber, human bodies, perhaps livestock nearby, and whatever was cooked last night have all reached a peaceful agreement to remain in the room indefinitely. You sit up, your feet find the cold floor. Someone adds fuel to the hearth. Outside, the settlement is waking. You have been conscious for perhaps 30 seconds, and already you are sharing your morning with half your household, yesterday's smoke, and a roof that technically requires regular agricultural maintenance. Good morning, Wessex. 2. The fire is your heating system, kitchen, lamp, and household emergency. And almost immediately, you need the fire. The hearth is not decorative. It is the central piece of household infrastructure around which an alarming amount of your survival has been arranged. It gives warmth. It cooks food. It provides light once daylight disappears. It dries damp clothing, heats water, hardens or repairs certain objects, and gives everyone somewhere to gather when the weather outside has become personally offensive. It also produces smoke, ash, sparks, soot, and the constant possibility that your timber house will become briefly spectacular. Keeping the fire alive matters because starting one from nothing is considerably more annoying than pressing a button on a boiler. So somebody checks the embers, adds fuel, encourages the flame, and begins another day of managing the household's most useful resident and most obvious arson risk. The hearth may sit on the floor of the building, where an open fire burns without anything resembling a modern chimney. Smoke has to find its way upward and eventually out through the roof, openings, or doorway. This arrangement works, provided your definition of works includes spending a considerable portion of your life inside the smoke before it leaves. Open hearths were a central feature of early medieval domestic buildings, while timber construction dominated ordinary Anglo-Saxon architecture. Your eyes adjust to it. Your lungs have no opportunity to submit feedback, and the fire needs feeding constantly. Wood does not arrive neatly cut, dried, and stacked beside the hearth through a monthly subscription service. Somebody has to collect it. Branches can be gathered. Larger pieces must be cut. Fuel has to be carried home and, ideally, kept dry enough to burn properly. In places where other combustible materials are available, households can make use of what the landscape provides, but there is always a simple equation underneath everything. No fuel means no fire. No fire means no hot food and a considerably less pleasant winter evening. So the household thinks about fuel long before it becomes cold. You stack it, protect it, gather more when you can. Children can help collect smaller pieces. Adults deal with heavier work. A wet autumn becomes annoying because wet fuel burns badly and fills your home with even more smoke, which hardly seems possible until it happens. Cooking happens directly beside all of this. Pots can be suspended or positioned around the heat. Food simmers, water warms, bread and other foods can be cooked using the fire and its embers according to the equipment available in the household. There is no temperature dial. Nobody sets the oven to 180 degrees and walks away confidently for 25 minutes. You judge heat by experience. You move the pot, you add wood, you move the pot again, you stare suspiciously at dinner. This is cooking by negotiation, and because the same fire provides heat for the room, summer produces its own little domestic joke. You still require cooking even when you would quite happily live without additional warmth. The household fire therefore continues performing its duties while everybody nearby develops a complicated relationship with personal space. At night, its importance changes again. Once the daylight disappears, artificial illumination is limited and valuable. The flames and glowing hearth provide useful light, while lamps or candles, where available and affordable, can supplement it. But you do not casually illuminate every corner of the house until midnight. Darkness arrives and wins most of the building. People draw closer to the fire. Work requiring good visibility becomes harder. Conversation becomes easier. Stories come out. Equipment is repaired. Clothing is worked on where the light allows it. The bright centre of the room shrinks into an island surrounded by shadow. And underneath all this comfort is the obvious problem. Your house is made largely from materials that burn. Timber burns, thatch burns, bedding burns, stored fuel burns, particularly enthusiastically because that is its entire purpose. Sparks therefore deserve attention. The hearth has to be managed carefully. Fire is never simply background decoration. Archaeological and historical evidence for early buildings consistently places open hearths inside structures built overwhelmingly from timber and other organic materials, making control of sparks and heat a basic domestic necessity. Yet you cannot simply remove the danger. Without the fire, the house becomes colder, darker, and much less useful. So you live beside it. You feed it. You cook over it. You warm yourself beside it. You watch it before going to sleep and hope the embers remain safely contained until morning. Modern fire safety tells you to keep flames away from combustible materials. Your entire house has responded by being combustible material. Good morning. The hearth needs more wood. 3. Your bed is a sack of organic materials with ambitions. Now let's discuss the bed, because you have technically been sleeping, although the furniture industry would contest the terminology. Depending on your wealth, you may have a raised wooden bed or a simpler sleeping platform, with bedding made from woolen blankets, hides, linen if you can afford it, and mattresses or stuffed sacks filled with available plant material such as straw. There is no memory foam, no pocket spring system, and nobody has spent 40 minutes online comparing firmness ratings while becoming progressively less certain what their spine actually wants. Bedding is valuable household property. Blankets require enormous labour to produce. Cloth is expensive because every stage of producing it requires somebody's hands. And whatever you've been sleeping on has shared the building with smoke, insects, food, damp clothing, and several human beings. You wake refreshed in the broad historical sense of having remained alive. The mattress itself is less a carefully engineered sleep surface and more an agreement between your body and whatever the household could stuff into a durable covering. Straw is useful because it is available after harvest, relatively springy when fresh, and considerably preferable to sleeping directly on packed earth. Other plant material might serve similar purposes. If you are wealthier, you can afford better bedding, more layers, more textiles, and perhaps something softer beneath you. If you are poor, your back receives whatever the agricultural economy has provided this season. Fresh stuffing is reasonably comfortable. Old stuffing develops character. It flattens, it shifts, it pokes through places it was not invited to poke through. It absorbs smells and moisture. Every so often it needs shaking, airing, replacing, or rearranging, because sleeping on the same compressed bundle of organic material indefinitely eventually turns it into something closer to a geological layer. And then there are the blankets. A woolen blanket is not something you casually replace because you dislike the colour. Sheep have been tended, wool has been processed, fibres have been prepared, thread has been spun by hand, cloth has been woven. The finished textile, therefore, represents an astonishing investment of time. You look after it, you mend it, you keep it dry, and when the night turns cold, which England manages with considerable enthusiasm, you become extremely emotionally attached to it. Winter changes everything about sleep. The fire may warm the central part of the house, but warmth fades as the night progresses. Drafts enter through gaps, the floor radiates cold. The roof above you has no insulated loft containing several inches of carefully regulated synthetic material. You sleep in clothing or under layers, sharing warmth where necessary, and discovering that personal space becomes much less philosophically important when the temperature drops. If several people sleep in the same building, nighttime is not silent either. Someone snores, someone coughs, a child wakes, a person turns over and rearranges straw with the subtle acoustics of somebody emptying a basket in darkness. The fire cracks, an animal makes a noise somewhere nearby. And because the household itself is one large shared environment, everyone receives the update. There are also smaller residents. Fleas and lice are familiar problems in early medieval life, and bedding made from natural materials provides plenty of opportunities for unwanted company. People could comb themselves, wash, clean clothing, air bedding, and take practical measures against pests, but completely removing them from a world filled with humans, animals, wool, straw, and closely shared sleeping spaces is another matter. Your mattress does not come with a warranty. It comes with biodiversity. Still, this bed is home. That matters. At the end of a day spent carrying water, tending animals, grinding grain, working fields, repairing tools, preparing food, spinning thread, and generally performing every basic service that modern life has quietly outsourced to machines, you are tired in a way that makes mattress branding considerably less important. You lie down, you pull the wool over yourself, the room darkens, the fire settles into red embers, smoke hangs faintly above you, and somebody nearby has already begun snoring with the confidence of a man who will never hear himself doing it. Your bed is lumpy, your blanket smells of smoke, something in the straw has moved, but you are warm enough. And in 878, that counts as an excellent night's accommodation. 4. Washing yourself requires cold water and a strong sense of priorities. Once you're upright, personal hygiene becomes an exercise in available water rather than bathroom design. Anglo-Saxon people were not simply wandering around proudly coated in centuries of dirt, whatever later stereotypes may suggest. Faces and hands could be washed, combs were common personal objects, clothing mattered, and grooming existed. What you do not have is conveniently heated running water emerging from a tiled wall because you rotated a small chrome handle. Water has to come from somewhere. A well, spring, stream, or other local source must be reached and the water carried home. Heating it requires fuel and time, so cleanliness exists within the limits of labour. You wash what needs washing, comb what can be persuaded into order, and move on with your morning. The shower is not missing because everyone hates hygiene. The shower is missing because somebody would first have to invent plumbing, and before you wash anything, somebody has to fetch the water. This sounds obvious until you realise how thoroughly modern plumbing has hidden water from you as a physical object. At home, you currently ask for water by moving your wrist slightly. In 878, water has weight. Every drop used for drinking, cooking, washing, brewing, and cleaning must come from a source and travel the final distance by human effort. So you take a wooden bucket, vessel, or ceramic container and head toward the local supply. If your settlement has a well, excellent. If not, perhaps you rely on a nearby spring or stream. The exact arrangement depends on where you live, but the basic inconvenience remains beautifully consistent. Water is never where you need it until somebody carries it there, and water is heavy. A full container quickly teaches you that 1 litre of water weighs roughly 1 kilogram, although nobody around you is using litres or kilograms, and would mostly like to know why you have begun explaining measurement systems instead of carrying the bucket. Back inside, you are not filling a bath. A full body wash involving large quantities of heated water is possible in principle, particularly for wealthier households, but it is not the effortless daily ritual modern people expect. Heating several containers means feeding the hearth, finding suitable vessels, waiting, and using fuel that might otherwise cook food or warm the building. Morning washing is therefore more targeted. Hands matter because they touch food and tools. Your face matters because other people look at it. You might rinse, wipe, scrub, and generally perform the sort of practical cleaning possible with a basin and cloth. Hair receives attention too. Combs are among the most familiar grooming objects from Anglo-Saxon archaeological sites, often made from bone or antler and carefully constructed with fine teeth. That tells you something important. People cared about their appearance, and combing was not merely cosmetic. It also helped deal with dirt, loose hair, and parasites, because the 9th century has generously provided you with all three. You drag the comb through your hair. It catches. You try again. Something tiny may be having a considerably worse morning than you are. Soap also exists in the early medieval world, although the exact substances and household practices available to you vary. Cleaning can involve water, alkaline materials, fats, and repeated scrubbing rather than the cheerful row of scented bottles currently occupying a modern shower. What you do not possess is a separate heated bathroom containing 12 products whose purposes have become increasingly difficult to distinguish. There is no morning body wash called Arctic Storm. There is water. There is effort. There is a cloth. Proceed. Teeth are another matter. You are not reaching automatically for a plastic toothbrush and fluoride toothpaste. Mouth cleaning can involve rinsing, rubbing, chewing particular twigs or plant materials, and other simple methods. But medieval dental care remains limited compared with anything available to you now. Fortunately, your diet contains far less refined sugar than a modern one, which gives your teeth at least one historical advantage. The 9th century has taken away toothpaste, but has also declined to invent cola, a surprisingly fair exchange. By the time you finish, you are not clinically sterilized. Nobody expects you to be. You are reasonably groomed by the standards of your community. Your hair is under control, your visible skin is cleaner, and you have used an amount of water proportionate to the labor required to obtain it. Then you look toward the bucket. It is noticeably emptier, which means somebody will eventually have to fetch more. Congratulations, you have successfully washed your face and created another household chore. 5. Getting dressed means wearing several weeks of someone's labor. Getting dressed sounds simple until you remember that every thread in your clothing exists because somebody made it. For most ordinary people, wool is enormously important. Linen is also used, particularly where households have access to it, and leather and animal skins serve various purposes. But before wool becomes the tunic you are pulling over yourself, sheep must be tended, fleece collected, cleaned, prepared, spun into thread, and woven into cloth. Then the cloth must be cut and sewn without the assistance of anything resembling a sewing machine. Clothing therefore carries value in a way that a modern multi-pack of t-shirts does not. You repair garments. You reuse material. You pass useful clothing through a household. A tear is not permission to go shopping. It is an invitation to locate a needle and accept that the tunic has entered another stage of its extremely long career. Start with the wool itself. Sheep have spent months producing your raw material while contributing very little to the administrative side of the process. Once the fleece is removed, it still does not remotely resemble clothing. It must be sorted and cleaned. Fibers need preparing so they can be spun. Then somebody takes a spindle and slowly turns those loose fibers into usable yarn. This is skilled work, and it is repetitive. Very repetitive. A person can spin while supervising children, talking, walking short distances, or sitting near the hearth, which is useful because producing enough thread for clothing consumes an extraordinary amount of time. There is no moment when the household announces that today's spinning is complete forever. There is only today's spinning. Then comes weaving. Looms turn the yarn into cloth, but again, this requires skill and patience. By the time a length of woolen fabric exists, you are looking at something that represents weeks of accumulated labour rather than a cheap material waiting to become a shirt. This explains why scraps matter. Offcuts can be reused. Worn garments can be patched. Better sections of an old piece of clothing can find new purposes. Cloth can be passed down, altered, repaired, and eventually reduced to increasingly humble duties until a piece that once formed part of a respectable tunic has become the 9th century equivalent of the rag under the sink. Nothing leaves the textile economy without a fight. For an ordinary man, a basic outfit might include a woolen tunic, worn with trousers or leggings, perhaps with a linen undergarment where circumstances allow. Women commonly wear long dresses or gowns, often with additional layers depending on weather, wealth, and local fashion. Cloaks provide essential warmth outdoors and can be fastened with brooches or pins. Belts hold clothing in place and also carry useful items because pockets, in the form you currently expect, have declined to attend. So your belt becomes your personal storage system. A knife may hang there. A small pouch can hold useful possessions. Keys might signal responsibility within a household. If you need something during the day, chances are good that it is attached to you, tucked into something, or being carried by hand. Colour also exists, and the Anglo-Saxon world is not simply an endless parade of people dressed in muddy brown. Natural dyes can produce a range of colours depending on the plants, processes, mordants, skill, and resources available. Some shades require more effort or expense than others, so clothing can communicate wealth and status even before anybody begins speaking. The richer you are, the finer the cloth can become. The poorer you are, the more important durability becomes. Either way, you do not own 40 outfits. Your clothing has to work. It protects you from cold, wind, dirt, thorns, labour, and the English weather which has already spent centuries testing fabric and sees no reason to stop now. And when something finally tears, you do not stand before it with the solemn disappointment of someone discovering that a fast-fashion t-shirt survived only 3 washes. You fetch thread, you find the needle, you repair it again, because what you are wearing is not merely clothing, it is sheep, field, spindle, loom, needle, fuel, daylight, skill, and weeks of human time gathered around your body. You pull on the tunic. Someone spent a very long time making it. Try not to catch it on the door. 6. Your shoes are leather, the ground is mud, and dry feet are aspirational. Then come your feet, which are about to discover that the English landscape has been waiting for them. Leather footwear exists, although quality and availability depend heavily on wealth and circumstance. A simple leather shoe can protect you from stones, thorns, cold ground, and the sort of agricultural substances that you prefer not to identify while walking. What it cannot do is turn February in Wessex into an indoor shopping centre. Tracks become muddy, fields become muddy, yards become muddy. The entrance of your house becomes a negotiated border between outside mud and inside mud. Leather needs maintaining and eventually wears through because the concept of an indestructible rubber sole remains some distance in humanity's future. You lace or fasten whatever footwear you possess and step outside. Within several minutes, the weather has begun processing it. The shoes themselves are relatively simple constructions. Leather is cut into shape, stitched together, and formed around the foot without anything resembling modern cushioning, reinforced heels, breathable mesh, or a marketing department promising revolutionary ankle support. Many early medieval shoes were made using turnshoe construction, where the pieces were stitched together inside out and then turned the right way around, producing a flexible shoe with the seams protected inside. Flexible is useful. Waterproof is another matter. Leather can be treated with fats or oils to help resist moisture, but if you spend enough time walking through wet grass, puddles, marshy ground, or the deep brown mixture developing beside the animal enclosure, eventually the damp finds you. Water has had several thousand years to study footwear and remains extremely committed to the project. Once your shoes are wet, drying them becomes another household task. You cannot simply place them on an electric shoe dryer and forget about them. They may be left near the hearth, but not so close that the leather becomes damaged or scorched. Too much heat can dry leather harshly, causing it to stiffen or crack. Too little heat means you may be putting damp shoes back on tomorrow morning. So you position them carefully, you check them, you turn them, you discover that medieval life contains an extraordinary amount of quietly supervising objects. Socks, where worn, are not the mass-produced cotton tubes you know now. Woolen foot coverings, hose, or other textile layers can provide warmth depending on the person and period. But again, every piece of fabric represents work. Nothing exists merely to make your toes comfortable unless somebody has spent time producing it. And your feet need all the help they can get because you walk constantly. You walk to fields, you walk to water, you walk to neighbouring settlements, you walk while tending livestock, you walk to church, you walk to markets. Unless you are wealthy enough to have regular access to a horse, your legs are your primary transport system, and there is no customer support number when they begin hurting. The surfaces are equally unhelpful. Village paths are not paved neatly. Roads and tracks can become rutted by carts and animals. Rain turns soil into mud. Frost hardens uneven ground. Summer dries tracks into dust before the next rainfall rearranges everything again. And then there are the animals. Cattle, pigs, sheep, horses, chickens, and human beings all share parts of the same working landscape. This means the ground contains more than mud, although everyone involved has sensibly decided not to hold a meeting about it. Your shoes protect you from most of this. Most. If they tear, you repair them. Leather is too useful to discard casually. A worn sole can sometimes be patched or replaced. Stitching can be renewed. A shoe may continue serving long after a modern person would have placed it solemnly beside the rubbish bin. By evening you return home with mud drying around the edges, damp worked into the leather, and the distinct feeling that the landscape has accompanied you indoors. You scrape what you can away. You set the shoes near the hearth. Tomorrow you will put them on again. They will still be slightly damp. Wessex has invented many things. Dry January footwear is not currently among them. 7. Breakfast is bread, pottage and ale before anyone has invented coffee. It's breakfast. And the first thing to understand is that the ordinary Anglo-Saxon table is built around grain much more securely than around heroic slabs of meat. Cereals such as wheat, barley, rye and oats matter enormously, alongside peas, beans, vegetables, dairy foods and whatever other produce the household and local landscape can provide. Bread is important. Thick, grain-based dishes and pottages are practical. Ale is deeply woven into food production and hospitality. Meat is available, especially through livestock and during particular occasions, but the idea that everyone in early medieval England begins the morning ripping enthusiastically into a roasted boar is mostly what happens when television gives every historical period the same banquet. Your real breakfast is filling, local, seasonal, repetitive, and produced through an amount of effort that makes pouring cereal into a bowl look almost offensively efficient. The bread in front of you may be made from whatever grain your household has available, which means the quality varies enormously. Wheat can produce finer bread, but other grains such as barley, rye, and oats are important precisely because ordinary life cannot afford to become overly sentimental about texture. If the harvest gives you barley, congratulations. You are emotionally invested in barley now. Grain can also become porridge or a thicker pottage, cooked slowly in a pot over the hearth. This is one of the great advantages of pottage. You can place almost anything reasonably edible into it, and the meal continues to qualify. Grain goes in. Peas might go in. Beans might go in. Leeks, onions, cabbage, herbs, or other vegetables may join depending on season and availability. Yesterday's leftovers can suddenly develop a promising second career. The pot simmers patiently while everybody pretends this was the plan. For an ordinary household, this kind of food makes enormous sense. It stretches ingredients, requires limited equipment, feeds several people, and can remain over the fire while other work continues. You do not have the luxury of preparing 3 separate breakfasts because one child has recently decided onions are emotionally unacceptable. Everyone is eating what the household has. Dairy foods can improve matters considerably. If you keep cattle, sheep, or goats, milk can be consumed or turned into products that last longer, such as butter and cheese. Fresh milk is useful but perishable, while cheese takes something highly temporary and turns it into something capable of surviving long enough to become extremely important. Eggs are available too, assuming your hens have chosen cooperation. Chickens remain surprisingly independent contractors. Then there is meat. Pork, beef, mutton, poultry, and game all exist in the Anglo-Saxon diet, but how regularly you eat them depends heavily on wealth, season, household resources, and circumstance. Livestock is often worth more alive than immediately turned into dinner. A cow can provide milk and eventually offspring. An ox can work. A sheep produces wool. Eating the animal means it stops providing these services, which is a surprisingly strong argument for having more cabbage. Pigs are somewhat different. They can forage in woodland, particularly where access to mass such as acorns is available, making them valuable sources of meat. Pork can be salted or preserved for later use. Still, the ordinary morning meal is not a royal feast. Alfred may have kingship problems. You have porridge. Both situations require patience. And then there is ale. Do not imagine everybody beginning breakfast catastrophically drunk. Ale is a normal part of early medieval food culture, produced from grain and consumed in households and communal settings. Strength varies, and brewing itself is important domestic work. Water is also drunk. The old idea that medieval people avoided water entirely because it was universally lethal is far too simple. People understood perfectly well that a clear spring was preferable to a suspicious stagnant puddle. They had eyes. But ale has advantages. It provides calories, stores grain in another useful form, and occupies an important place in hospitality and social life. What you do not have is coffee. There is no kettle boiling for tea either. No orange juice. No chocolate spread. No banana quietly turning brown on the side, because everyone keeps insisting they will eat it later. Everything on your breakfast table comes from a much narrower world. The grain may have grown within walking distance. The milk came from an animal you recognize personally. The vegetables were pulled from local soil. The bread exists because someone needed it. The pottage exists because someone kept the hearth alive. Nothing has travelled casually across an ocean to improve your morning. You finish the bowl. It is warm. It is filling. It tastes very similar to yesterday. And if the harvest is good, there is an excellent chance it will taste very similar tomorrow as well. Breakfast is complete. Now someone has to grind more grain. 8. Every loaf begins with someone grinding grain. By hand. Before you become too comfortable with that bread, we need to discuss how grain becomes flour, because this is where modern people discover just how much invisible machinery is hiding inside breakfast. Grain does not arrive in a paper bag labelled plain flour. It must be harvested, dried, stored, threshed, winnowed and ground. Hand querns are part of domestic food production, and grinding is repetitive physical work. You turn stone against stone while grain is slowly reduced into something useful. And you continue because everyone has developed the unreasonable habit of wanting to eat again tomorrow. Multiply that labour across days, weeks, months and households, and suddenly bread stops looking like a humble food. It is the edible end point of an enormous chain of human effort. You take a piece from the loaf. Somebody's shoulders have already paid for it. And grinding is only one stage. Long before the grain reaches your quern, somebody has had to grow it. Fields must be prepared, seed must be sown, crops watched through the growing season, and then everything has to be harvested at roughly the correct moment. A bad spell of weather at the wrong time can turn months of work into a very serious conversation about winter. Once harvested, the grain still has opinions. The useful kernels must be separated from stalks and husks. Threshing loosens the grain. Winnowing uses moving air to separate lighter chaff from heavier kernels. None of this involves plugging an appliance into the wall. It involves hands. Lots of hands. And dust. An astonishing amount of dust. Eventually you have stored grain, which sounds wonderfully secure until you remember that mice have also spent the last several thousand years developing a professional interest in stored grain, so the household guards it carefully. Dry storage matters because damp grain can spoil. Containers need watching. Pests need discouraging. You cannot afford to lose much because the amount stored after harvest is not simply food sitting in reserve. It is breakfast in February. It is seed for the next sowing. It is ale waiting to happen. It is the difference between a difficult winter and a catastrophic one. Then, someone brings a portion to the quern. By Alfred's time, rotary hand querns are well established. 2 circular stones work together. The upper stone turned against the lower, while grain is fed between them. The movement is simple enough to understand within seconds, and tiring enough to respect within minutes. Turn, feed grain, turn again, collect meal, repeat. At first you may find it almost soothing. This feeling will pass. The grinding takes time. and the flour you produce is not as perfectly uniform as something from a modern industrial mill. Coarser particles remain. Tiny fragments from the stone can sometimes find their way into the meal over repeated use. Bread is therefore not always the soft, pale, perfectly textured object you currently purchase in plastic packaging. It has structure. It has substance. Occasionally it has geological involvement. If finer flour is wanted, the meal can be sieved, but refinement means more labour and some loss of useful material. Ordinary households therefore have every reason to make food efficiently rather than pursue the 9th century equivalent of artisanal white sourdough. The grain can become bread, porridge, pottage or ale. Each form stretches the harvest in a different way, and almost every meal reminds you how central cereals are to survival. This also means the person doing the grinding performs one of the least glamorous and most essential jobs in the household. No chronicler records the morning triumph. No poet announces that Ethelflad has achieved an especially consistent barley meal. Nobody rides from Winchester carrying the news. But without this work, everyone notices very quickly. You finish grinding enough grain for the next batch. Your arms ache. Fine dust has settled on your hands and clothing. Someone takes the meal toward the hearth. Eventually it becomes bread. And later, when somebody casually tears off a piece and eats it without comment, you experience one of humanity's oldest domestic traditions, doing an enormous amount of work so that everyone else can make breakfast look effortless. 9. Your house is also a workshop, because dedicated rooms are a luxury. With breakfast dealt with, the household becomes a workplace, although in truth it never stopped being one. The boundary between home and work is extremely thin, when most of the things you need must be produced, repaired, processed, or maintained close to where you live. One person may be working with wool. Someone else repairs a wooden object. Food is being prepared near the hearth. Tools need sharpening. Leather needs attention. Baskets, containers, fences, harness, clothing, and household equipment wear out because apparently objects have been breaking since the invention of objects. Even a prosperous household depends upon a constant background hum of practical labour. There is no moment when somebody announces that the domestic chores are complete. The chores reproduce quietly while nobody is looking. In that respect, 878 has achieved something timeless. The first thing to understand is that a house like yours is not divided into little specialist zones with polite labels. There is no utility room. There is no craft room. There is no garage containing 3 screwdrivers, a bicycle pump, and a box of cables nobody has identified since 1998. The same indoor space has to perform several jobs, and it performs them all at once. Near the best light, somebody may be spinning wool. Closer to the hearth, another person works on food. A broken wooden bowl waits to be repaired. A leather strap needs stitching. A knife needs sharpening. Somewhere, a child has been given a small, useful task and is carrying it out with the speed of someone who has discovered that adults continue inventing tasks after the first one is finished. The tools around you are simple compared with modern machinery, but they are not crude. A good knife matters. An axe matters. An awl matters. Needles matter. Shears, whetstones, spindles, loom weights, woodworking tools, and countless other objects represent skill, material, and time. Iron in particular has value because metalworking requires specialist knowledge. If you own a useful iron tool, you do not casually leave it outside in the rain because you forgot where you put it. You know where it is. Everyone knows where it is. If it disappears, breakfast conversation changes immediately. Wood is everywhere because wood is one of the great materials of ordinary life. Houses are built with it. Bowls can be made from it. Handles, buckets, furniture, pegs, carts, fences, chests, and tools depend on it. A skilled woodworker can turn a tree into half the household, provided the tree is prepared to cooperate. The difficulty is that wood wears. It splits. It loosens. It rots. So repair becomes part of daily rhythm. You do not wait until something becomes completely useless and then replace it with a newer model. You repair it while it is still mostly useful. A cracked handle gets changed. A loose joint is tightened. A wooden vessel may be patched or replaced only when continued optimism becomes structurally irresponsible. Leather behaves much the same way. Belts stretch, shoes wear, harness cracks, bags tear. All of it can be cleaned, greased, stitched, patched, and persuaded into another season of service. This makes ordinary people highly competent in a range of small practical jobs. Not necessarily expert, but competent enough. You know how to sharpen a blade because a blunt blade still needs to cut. You know how to mend cloth because clothing still needs to be worn. You know how to maintain a fence because pigs have absolutely no respect for theoretical boundaries. And then there is textile work, which seems to occupy every spare moment the household foolishly believed it had. Spinning can continue while other activities happen. Thread accumulates slowly. Cloth takes even longer. Sewing follows. Repairs follow that. The house, therefore, has a constant visual texture of production. Bundles of fibre, tools, wood shavings, baskets, stored grain, cloth, leather. 1. Pots, fuel. Nothing is there for decoration alone, if it could instead be doing something useful. Even wealth does not remove work so much as redistribute it. A richer household may have more servants, dependents, skilled workers, storage, equipment, and specialist production, but somebody is still doing the tasks. The polished object at the end of the process always hides hands behind it. By midday, the house is noisier than when you woke. The spindle turns. A knife scrapes wood. A pot bubbles. Someone hammers something small and important. A child asks a question. An adult answers while continuing to work. You look around and realise that your home is not where labour ends. It is where most of it lives. The medieval work-from-home arrangement has arrived. Unfortunately, nobody gets to log off. 10. The farming year owns your calendar more completely than any king. Eventually we have to leave the house and talk about farming, because for most people the land dictates daily life with an authority greater than Alfred's. The agricultural year tells you what matters now. Fields need preparing, crops need sowing, weeds need controlling, hay needs cutting, harvest needs gathering, animals need managing, fences need maintaining, and winter supplies need protecting. Delay the wrong task, and nature does not accept your explanation. A king may move a meeting, barley does not. Your family's security is tied to harvests, livestock, weather, stored food, and the labour available within the household and community. A poor season is not disappointing in the way a ruined barbecue is disappointing. It can reshape the entire winter ahead. The weather forecast, unfortunately, consists mainly of looking upward and forming an opinion. Spring begins with urgency. Once the ground is workable, fields need attention. Ploughing, sowing, repairing boundaries, tending animals and preparing gardens all compete for labour. You cannot decide that this week feels emotionally better suited to staying indoors. Seed has a window, weather has a window. The entire year is made from windows, and most of them close without sending a reminder. Some fields may be worked with ploughs drawn by oxen, depending on local conditions and the resources of the community. Elsewhere, lighter tools and human labour do more of the work. Either way, soil does not prepare itself. Then comes summer, when the work changes rather than decreases. Crops need watching. Hay must be cut and dried while the weather allows it. Livestock continues requiring food, water, supervision, and an extraordinary amount of fencing because animals have an instinctive understanding that whatever is growing on the other side is probably better. A damaged fence therefore becomes urgent in a way that sounds absurd until 6 pigs discover it. At that point, your afternoon has been cancelled. The garden matters too. Leeks, onions, cabbages, peas, beans, herbs, and other useful plants can supplement the grain that forms the backbone of the diet. Nothing is taken for granted. Even a modest patch of vegetables represents food that does not have to be found elsewhere later. And then harvest approaches. This is the moment around which much of the year has quietly been organising itself. Grain must be cut when ready and gathered before bad weather destroys it. The work is intense because the crop cannot simply remain politely in the field until everyone has caught up. Households depend on one another. Extra hands matter. Children can help with suitable tasks. Neighbours may cooperate because everyone understands the same uncomfortable mathematics. Miss the harvest and winter becomes much longer. Once grain is gathered, the labour still refuses to end. It has to be dried, threshed, winnowed, stored, guarded from damp, guarded from pests, and rationed with enough discipline that some survives until the next growing season, and some of it cannot be eaten at all. You need seed for next year. This is one of farming's crueler little jokes. A hungry household may sit beside perfectly edible grain that must remain untouched, because eating tomorrow's seed solves today's problem by creating a larger one later. Autumn brings slaughter and preservation for some livestock, especially animals that cannot be supported through winter. Meat can be salted, smoked, dried, or otherwise preserved depending on resources. Winter fodder must be considered. Fuel must be collected. Buildings need repairs, before cold weather turns every neglected crack into an argument. Then winter arrives and outdoor work slows, but life does not. Animals still need tending. Tools need repairing. Cloth must be made. Food stores must be watched. Grain continues being ground. Firewood continues disappearing with remarkable speed. And through all of this, politics continues somewhere beyond the fields. Kings fight. Armies move. Messengers arrive. But the land remains unimpressed. If Alfred summons men during a crucial agricultural period, the problem is obvious. The kingdom requires defending, but the fields still require harvesting. Military necessity and farming necessity are both perfectly capable of being urgent at the same time. You stand at the edge of the field and look at the crop. The king may be fighting for Wessex. You are fighting for February. 11. Oxen are the heavy machinery and they have personalities. For the heaviest agricultural work, animal power matters. Oxen can pull ploughs and carts with a strength that transforms what a household can accomplish, which makes cattle economically significant in a way modern people generally reserve for tractors, delivery vans, and moderately expensive kitchen appliances. Livestock provides more than meat. Cattle can give milk, traction, hides, and wealth. Sheep provide wool. Pigs turn available woodland and food waste into pork with admirable commitment. Animals, therefore, occupy the centre of household economics, which means you spend an astonishing amount of your life thinking about creatures that possess absolutely no understanding of your financial dependence on them. If an ox becomes lame, this is not merely veterinary inconvenience. Your agricultural machinery has developed an ankle problem and cannot be replaced before lunch. Oxen are especially valuable because they can turn human effort into something much larger. A team can pull a plough through ground that would be exhausting to work entirely by hand. They can haul carts loaded with timber, harvested crops, manure, building materials, barrels, or whatever else needs moving from one inconvenient location to another. They are slow compared with horses, but steady strength is exactly what much agricultural work requires. The problem is that an ox is not actually a machine. It gets hungry, it gets tired, it can become ill, it can become frightened, and occasionally it simply appears to disagree with the direction in which you believe the entire working day should proceed. So handling cattle is a skill. You learn the animals. You know which one pulls reliably, which one needs watching, which one dislikes another animal, and which one possesses the remarkable ability to become difficult precisely when several neighbours are watching. They need feeding even when they are not working. This is the part modern machinery has rather thoughtfully eliminated. A plough does not continue eating through winter. An ox does. Keeping cattle means maintaining pasture when grass is available and storing fodder for the months when it is not. Hay therefore matters not merely because animals enjoy it, but because your ability to keep working animals alive through winter determines what happens when spring ploughing begins. A poor hay crop can become next year's agricultural problem. Everything connects to everything else. Cattle also produce manure, which is considerably more valuable to you than the modern suburban imagination tends to appreciate. Manure can be spread on fields to improve fertility. So the animal eats what the land grows and then contributes enthusiastically toward growing more of it. The process is elegant. The smell is less so. Then there is milk. Cows can contribute dairy products to the household, but milk does not arrive indefinitely simply because you own a cow. Calving, feeding, season, health, and household management all affect what is available. Fresh milk also spoils quickly, which is why turning it into butter or cheese is so useful. Cheese is essentially a way of persuading summer milk to remain relevant later. Sheep perform a different kind of economic magic. They provide wool, one of the foundations of clothing and textile production. They can also provide meat, milk in some contexts, and hides. A flock is therefore not scenery placed artistically behind a medieval village. It is mobile wealth covered in future clothing. Pigs are perhaps even more straightforward. Where woodland rights permit it, pigs can be driven into woods to feed on acorns and other mast in autumn. This converts something growing naturally beneath trees into preserved meat for winter, with the pig handling most of the collection work itself. For once, somebody else is doing the gathering. But every animal requires supervision. Fences fail. Gates are left open. Cattle wander. Sheep discover gaps previously believed to be theoretical. Pigs possess an almost philosophical opposition to remaining where you place them. So part of ordinary life becomes the endless management of animals whose importance is matched only by their complete indifference to your plans. You repair the fence. You check the ox. You count the sheep. You locate the pig. And eventually the plough begins moving again. In Alfred's England, the farm's most expensive equipment breathes, eats, produces manure, and occasionally refuses to cooperate. Fortunately, nobody has invented the tractor repair bill yet. 12. Textile work quietly consumes an astonishing amount of human life. Back inside, or near the doorway where the light is better, somebody is spinning. This deserves its own segment, because textile production is one of those vast historical industries that becomes almost invisible once factories take it away from the household. Wool must be prepared and spun before it can be woven. Flax, where linen is produced, requires its own considerable processing. Thread emerges slowly from repeated skilled movement, and cloth emerges even more slowly after that. Women were deeply involved in textile production, although specific work varied by household, place, wealth, and circumstance. The important thing is the scale. Clothing, blankets, bags, hangings, and other textiles represent hours upon hours of labour. A modern person sees a woolen tunic. A 9th century household sees stored work. This is why fabric is repaired until the fabric itself begins requesting retirement. Start with the sheep. Before anything can be spun, somebody has spent months keeping the animal alive, which sounds straightforward until the sheep develops an opinion about fences, weather, predators, food, or simply where it would prefer to stand today. Then comes the fleece. Fresh wool is not the soft, perfectly even material sitting in neat balls at a craft shop. It contains dirt, grease, bits of vegetation, and evidence that the sheep has been living outdoors with very little concern for future textile quality. So the wool has to be sorted and prepared. Fibres are teased apart and arranged so they can be spun. Then comes the spindle, one of the most ordinary and important tools in the household. You twist fibres together. The spindle turns. Thread forms, slowly. This is the part that modern life has almost completely hidden from you. Producing enough thread for a garment takes a remarkable amount of time, and that is before weaving begins. Spinning therefore fits around other work because it has to. A woman might spin while sitting near the hearth, watching children, talking with other members of the household, or whenever her hands are available. There is always more thread to make. Always. If somebody in the household announces that they have finished spinning forever, the reasonable assumption is that civilization has ended. Once enough yarn exists, weaving begins. Depending on the type of loom being used, threads are carefully arranged under tension and crossed systematically to produce cloth. This requires concentration, experience, and an understanding of how the material behaves. Make a mistake, and the mistake does not disappear because you refresh the page. You have woven it into the garment, so you fix it. Then continue. The resulting cloth might become a tunic, dress, cloak, blanket, bag, or another useful household textile. Better quality fabric may be finer and more carefully finished. Coarser cloth works perfectly well for harder use. Colour adds another layer of effort. Natural dyes can produce yellows, reds, browns, greens, blues, and other shades depending on available plants, techniques, and resources. Dyeing cloth is therefore another skilled process involving gathering materials, preparing the dye, heating liquid, and getting the fibre to accept the colour with some degree of consistency. Even looking slightly fashionable requires a small chemistry department. Linen can demand even more preparation. Flax must be grown, harvested, dried, processed to separate useful fibres from the woody stalk, prepared, spun, and woven. The finished result can be lighter and smoother than wool, and useful for garments worn close to the skin, but nothing about the process is quick. This is why textiles represent wealth. You can store them, trade them, give them, repair them, pass them down. A cloak is not merely something keeping rain off your shoulders. It contains land, sheep, skill, fuel, tools, daylight, and human time. And then you tear it on a thorn. There is a moment of silence. Not because the damage is impossible to repair, because somebody knows exactly how many hours went into the thing you have just casually introduced to a hedge. So out comes the needle. The hole is patched. The garment continues. Later, the patch may itself be patched. Eventually, the useful cloth may be cut down for another purpose, and smaller remnants continue through the household until there is almost nothing left worth saving. Nothing is wasted casually because nothing was created casually. By evening, the spindle is still turning. There is more wool beside it. There will be more tomorrow. The 9th century has not invented fast fashion. It has invented very, very slow fashion. 13. The household economy depends on women, far more than the chronicles mention. And this brings us to one of the great distortions of surviving history. Written sources spend enormous energy on kings, bishops, battles, abbots, treaties, noblemen, and the occasional comet, while ordinary women continue doing a substantial share of the work required for society to exist beneath the level at which chroniclers become excited. Food processing, textile production, dairying, brewing, childcare, household management, agricultural tasks, and countless other forms of labour could involve women depending on status and local circumstances. Elite women might manage substantial estates and resources. Poorer women worked because everyone worked. Your household cannot function if half its adults spend the day merely standing decoratively beside the hearth. Fortunately, 9th century survival has already noticed this. The chronicler may not write down who made dinner. Everyone at dinner knows. Start with food, because food has the inconvenient habit of being required every day. Grain needs processing. Vegetables need gathering and preparing. Milk needs dealing with quickly before nature begins making alternative arrangements for it. Butter can be churned. Cheese can be produced. Ale must be brewed. Bread must be prepared. Pottage must be watched over the fire. None of these tasks sounds particularly dramatic. That is precisely why history often loses them. Nobody writes an heroic poem about successfully keeping milk from spoiling. Yet if the household repeatedly fails at these jobs, everyone becomes extremely interested. Brewing deserves particular attention because ale is an important part of everyday food and hospitality. In many households, brewing forms part of women's domestic labour. Grain has already been grown, harvested, processed and malted before the brewer even begins turning it into something drinkable. Water must be fetched. Fuel must be supplied. Vessels need cleaning and maintaining. Your casual cup of ale has a production chain. Apparently even the 9th century has supply logistics. Then there is clothing, which we have already discovered is essentially human time converted into fabric. Women frequently perform much of the spinning and weaving that keeps a household clothed. This work can fill any remaining gaps in the day, assuming the phrase remaining gaps has not caused everybody in the house to laugh uncontrollably. You spin while supervising something else. You mend while talking. You prepare fibre when daylight permits. The spindle is never very far away, because everyone keeps wearing clothes, and clothes continue wearing out. Dairying creates another constant rhythm. Animals have to be milked according to the animal's schedule, not yours. Milk then needs processing because without refrigeration it will not politely wait until Thursday evening when you feel more organised. Butter and cheese help preserve valuable nutrition, but they require work and skill. Again, the household depends on knowledge that may never appear in a royal chronicle. Knowing when the curds are right matters. Knowing whether stored food is still good matters. Knowing how much grain remains matters. Knowing which child has disappeared suspiciously near the berry bushes also matters. Women can participate in agricultural labour as well. Harvest especially demands hands. When crops are ready, households cannot afford rigid modern job descriptions. People reap, gather, carry, glean, tend animals, process food, and do whatever circumstances require. Status changes the kind of work rather than eliminating responsibility. A wealthy woman may not spend the entire day grinding grain herself, but elite women can hold land, oversee households and estates, control resources, make gifts to religious institutions, and appear in surviving legal documents. Anglo-Saxon women could possess property in their own right under circumstances that later medieval stereotypes sometimes obscure. That does not mean your society is secretly egalitarian. It emphatically is not. Power, wealth, family, freedom, and status all shape what choices anyone possesses. But women are economic actors within this world, not scenery waiting beside the hall while men conduct history, and motherhood adds another layer to everything. Children need feeding, clothing, teaching, watching, and gradually introducing to useful work. Babies do not suspend textile production merely because they are babies. Toddlers do not respect brewing schedules. A household's working rhythm bends around them while continuing anyway. By evening, the visible evidence of this labour is everywhere. There is bread, there is ale, there is cheese, someone has mended the clothing, someone has spun more thread, the children are fed, tomorrow's food has been considered. None of it earns a battle poem. But remove that labour for 3 days and the heroic warriors will notice immediately. History remembers who defended Wessex. The household remembers who made Wessex worth defending. 14. Childhood ends roughly when you become useful. Et. Now look at the children. Because childhood in your world is real, affectionate, playful, and considerably more involved in household survival than a modern school timetable would allow. Children learn by being around adults and gradually taking on useful tasks. They fetch, carry, watch animals, help with food preparation, gather fuel, assist in fields, learn crafts, and absorb the practical knowledge that will eventually allow them to run households of their own. There are games and toys and stories because human children have never agreed to spend childhood entirely productively, but there is no long protected interval in which responsibility is postponed until adulthood. If you are physically capable of carrying a small bucket, history has already located a small bucket for you. Congratulations on your promotion. The process begins gradually. Nobody hands a 5-year-old an axe, points toward the forest, and wishes them luck. Young children stay close to the household, watching what adults do and copying smaller parts of it. They collect kindling. They carry light objects. They help scatter food for animals, watch younger siblings, gather plants, or perform the endless tiny errands that keep a working household moving. And there are many errands. Bring that. Hold this. Go and find your brother. Tell your mother the pot is boiling. No, the other pot. Apparently childhood has invented middle management remarkably early. As you grow, the work grows with you. Boys and girls both learn practical skills, although the exact tasks expected of them depend on family, status, sex, local custom, and what work the household actually performs. A child growing up on a farm needs to understand animals, crops, weather, tools, and seasons, because adulthood is not going to arrive with a training manual. You learn by doing. You watch someone milk a cow until eventually you help. You watch grain being processed until your hands know the rhythm. You see wool spun, wood worked, food preserved, fences repaired, and animals managed so many times that the knowledge becomes ordinary. Formal schooling is another matter. Most children in 878 are not spending their mornings seated in rows practicing handwriting. Education in reading and writing is concentrated largely among religious communities and elites, especially boys being prepared for clerical careers, although some elite girls can also receive education. For most ordinary children, useful knowledge is oral and practical. Your classroom is the household. Your curriculum is survival. Examinations happen when the cow gets loose. Children still play, of course. Archaeology and later written evidence show a world containing simple toys and games, and there is no reason to imagine children of Alfred's England behaving fundamentally unlike children anywhere else. They run, compete, imitate adults, invent games, quarrel, tell stories, throw things they have been specifically asked not to throw, and display the ancient human talent for becoming extremely noisy at the exact moment an exhausted adult wants silence. Small carved objects, balls, counters, and improvised toys can all become entertainment. Sticks have already been invented, which means children possess essentially unlimited equipment. But play exists beside responsibility rather than replacing it. During harvest, everyone capable of helping becomes useful. Children can gather cut stalks, glean grain left behind, carry smaller loads, mind animals, or help with food and water. A family cannot afford to ignore available labour while a year's food is sitting outdoors beneath an English sky preparing to be rained on. Children also experience the harder realities of the period directly. Illness is dangerous. Accidents happen. Food shortages affect everyone. Some children lose parents early. Some become servants or dependents in other households as they grow. Children born into slavery inherit a completely different and harsher position from those born free. The medieval family is therefore not a sentimental refuge from the adult world. It is how you are introduced to it. By the time you are approaching adolescence, you may already possess practical abilities that many modern adults would regard as specialist hobbies. You can help produce food, tend livestock, recognize useful plants, maintain basic equipment, understand seasonal work, and contribute meaningfully to household survival. Nobody holds a ceremony when this happens. One day you are following an adult carrying a tiny bundle of sticks. A few years later, somebody younger is following you. You have become useful. Unfortunately, everyone has noticed. 15. Your place in society has a monetary value attached to it. Let's talk about class, although the 9th century has found an unusually literal way to approach the subject. Anglo-Saxon society distinguishes sharply between people of different ranks, including kings, leading nobles, thegns, ordinary free people, and the unfree. Legal compensation can vary according to status. The principle of wergild, the value attached to a person's life for compensation purposes, means that hierarchy is not merely something everyone vaguely senses when an important man enters the hall. It can have legal mathematics attached to it. Your birth, freedom, family connections, property, lord, and reputation all matter. Equality before the law is not the operating assumption. Society is layered, everyone broadly knows where they stand, and moving through those layers is difficult. Medieval England has invented the price comparison website. Unfortunately, the product being compared is you. If you are an ordinary free person, you have legal standing that distinguishes you sharply from someone who is enslaved. You can possess property, enter obligations, participate in local legal processes, and expect injuries against you to be addressed according to recognized custom and law. But your value is not the same as everyone else's. A thegn occupies a much higher social position. He is tied to lordship, land, military responsibility, and royal service in ways that place him above the ordinary free farmer. Above him stand the greatest nobles and royal officials, men whose wealth may encompass large estates, followers, livestock, buildings, and obligations spread across several communities. Then, naturally, there is the king. Nobody needs a spreadsheet to understand that Alfred ranks above you. The legal system simply makes the hierarchy harder to ignore. Wergild is part of a broader culture of compensation, designed partly to prevent violence from spiraling endlessly between families. If somebody is killed, the problem is not merely between one dead person and one offender. Kinship matters enormously. The victim belongs to a family network whose honour, economic security, and expectations have been damaged. Without some accepted settlement, retaliation can invite retaliation. One death becomes two become four. Eventually everyone has forgotten who originally stole whose cow, but 6 cousins are furious and somebody has brought a spear. Compensation offers another path. The offender or their kin may owe payment determined by the status of the victim and circumstances of the offence. This does not make killing casual or cheap. Quite the opposite. It turns violence into a serious social and financial liability extending beyond the individual who committed it. Your relatives therefore have another reason to care about your behaviour. You are not simply capable of embarrassing the family. You can become extremely expensive. Status shapes other areas too. Oaths do not exist in a social vacuum. The standing of the people supporting a claim can matter. Lords possess authority, their dependents do not. Royal protection carries its own weight. Offences against different people, households, churches, or royal interests can attract different consequences. The law recognises a world built from unequal relationships because the society itself is built from unequal relationships. And everybody can see hierarchy in daily life. The wealthy have better clothing, better weapons, more land, larger households, more animals, and greater access to imported or finely made goods. A nobleman's hall is not simply your house with a slightly nicer rug. It is a centre of power where food is distributed, loyalty is rewarded, guests are received, decisions are made, and followers gather around someone capable of supporting them. Gift-giving matters enormously in this world. A lord gives weapons, clothing, treasure, food, protection, and opportunities. Followers give loyalty and service. The relationship is personal as much as institutional. There is no human resources department. There is a man whose favour you would strongly prefer to retain. For ordinary people, your immediate social world matters just as much. Your family matters, your neighbours matter, whether others regard you as reliable matters. You live among people who know roughly what land you work, what animals you own, who your relatives are, whether you fulfil obligations, and probably what happened during that argument last autumn that you hoped everyone had forgotten. They have not. A small community has excellent memory. So you move through a society where status surrounds you constantly. It determines expectations. It influences legal protection. It shapes military duty, wealth, marriage prospects, and whose voice carries furthest when disagreement begins. You may never know the exact legal calculation attached to every person you meet. You do not need to. The important part is obvious. Some lives are legally worth more than others, and in Alfred's Wessex, even the law knows exactly where everybody is sitting. 16. Some people in your community are not free at all. Below the free population is a reality that comfortable versions of Anglo-Saxon England sometimes glide past too quickly. Slavery exists. Unfree people can be owned, transferred, compelled to labour, and treated legally in ways profoundly different from free members of society. People might enter slavery through warfare, punishment, birth, debt, or desperate circumstances, and the institution remains part of English society for generations after Alfred. So when you imagine the warm hearth, the carved wooden cup, the woolen clothing, and the picturesque little settlement beneath an autumn sky, you also have to imagine the unequal human relationships supporting parts of that economy. The early medieval world can be beautiful and skilled and culturally rich, while still containing systems that are brutally unjust. History has always been capable of doing several things at once. If you are enslaved, the most important difference is brutally simple. Your labour is not entirely yours. A free farmer may owe duties to a lord, taxes to the king, military service, rents, or work connected with the land he occupies. His life is hardly a festival of personal liberty, but he possesses a recognised legal position that an enslaved person does not share. An enslaved worker can be treated as property. They may work in agriculture, tend livestock, perform domestic labour, prepare food, produce textiles, or carry out whatever tasks the household or estate requires. Their exact circumstances vary enormously. Someone working inside a wealthy household may experience a very different daily life from somebody performing hard agricultural labour on an estate. Neither situation makes the underlying condition voluntary, and slavery is not hidden on the edges of society. It is part of the economy. Anglo-Saxon law codes mention enslaved people because legislators are regulating a world in which their existence is considered ordinary. Laws discuss offences involving them, their behaviour, their owners, and the consequences when someone else's enslaved worker is injured or killed. The uncomfortable language of law makes the inequality unmistakable. A free person's injury is treated as an offence against that person and their social position. Damage to an enslaved person can also be treated as a loss suffered by the owner. You have become, legally, somebody else's damaged asset. It is difficult to find a colder sentence about human life. War provides one route into this condition. Captives can be enslaved, and the warfare surrounding Alfred's lifetime creates plenty of opportunities for people to be displaced, captured, exchanged, or carried away. This cuts in several directions. Scandinavian raiders take captives from Britain and Ireland. Anglo-Saxon warfare can produce captives as well. Nobody in the 9th century possesses a moral monopoly on the institution. The Vikings did not arrive and introduce slavery to an innocent England. It was already there. Poverty can also push people toward forms of dependence so severe that freedom becomes precarious. Families facing hunger, debt, or social collapse sometimes make decisions that are almost impossible to understand from the comfort of a stocked refrigerator. Survival has bargaining power. And if you are born to an enslaved mother, your own status can follow hers. Childhood therefore begins very differently depending on which side of the legal boundary you occupy. The free child carrying kindling may eventually inherit land, enter agreements, participate in legal assemblies, or establish a household. The enslaved child may grow into labour that belongs to someone else. Same settlement, same weather, same church bell. Entirely different future. Christianity complicates this without immediately ending it. Priests preach about souls, sin, charity, and Christian obligation, while living inside a society where slavery remains normal. Enslaved people can be Christian. Owners can free them, and manumission does occur. Churches and religious institutions can become involved in freeing people, but conversion does not make the institution disappear. Medieval societies are perfectly capable of holding a religious belief about the spiritual worth of a person while maintaining a social system that denies that person freedom. Human beings remain impressively talented at arranging contradictions. So as you walk through your settlement, Remember that not everyone working beside you is there under the same terms. The woman carrying water may be free. The man tending cattle may owe labour to a lord. Someone working in the household may be enslaved. From a distance, they are all simply people doing the work that keeps Wessex alive. Up close, the law sees enormous differences between them, and unfortunately for the people at the bottom, the law has no difficulty remembering which is which. 17. Justice is local, public, and very interested in who will swear for you. If somebody steals your livestock, injures a relative, disputes your land, or accuses you of something unpleasant, there is no police station waiting beneath a reassuring blue sign. Law works through assemblies, local authority, custom, oaths, compensation, sureties, kinship, and royal legislation layered together in ways that are both sophisticated and intensely personal. Reputation matters because people may need to swear to your reliability. Witnesses matter. Your relatives matter. Your lord matters. Alfred will become famous for lawmaking, although he is building upon a much older legal tradition rather than inventing English law over breakfast. Justice is conducted in a world where society itself helps enforce society. This works reasonably well provided the people who know you are willing to stand beside you and announce before God that you are trustworthy. Suddenly, maintaining good relations with the neighbours feels less optional. The local assembly is central to this. Disputes are not usually carried hundreds of miles to some enormous royal courthouse. They are handled within the structures of the community, before people who know the land, the families, and probably the background to the argument in considerably more detail than either side would prefer. The men gathered there are not strangers. They may know who owned the disputed field last year. They may remember where the boundary stone used to stand. They may also remember that you once accused your neighbour of moving it after dark. Small communities have excellent archival systems. They are called neighbours. An oath carries real weight because spoken testimony exists within a religious and social world where swearing falsely before God is no casual matter. If you deny an accusation, you may need others to support your oath. These oath helpers are not necessarily eyewitnesses in the modern sense. Their role can be to affirm that you are a person whose word deserves belief, which means your reputation has legal value. Spend years cheating everyone, breaking agreements, and starting fights, and you may discover that the community has developed an unfortunate shortage of people eager to stand beside you during proceedings. This is not the moment to realise you should have been nicer about the shared grazing. Witnesses matter too, particularly in transactions. If land changes hands, property is transferred, or an agreement is made, doing it publicly and before recognised witnesses helps protect everyone later. Written charters exist, especially in royal and ecclesiastical contexts, but ordinary society still relies heavily on collective memory and public acknowledgement. You want people to remember what happened, preferably the same version. The law also tries to prevent private violence from expanding into feud. Compensation can settle injuries, theft, and killings, according to recognised values. Where possible, payment turns revenge into something finite. This does not mean everyone calmly accepts a purse of silver and goes home feeling emotionally complete. Families are still families. Honour still matters. But a recognised settlement gives society a mechanism for stopping one injury from generating several more. The alternative is that your cousin avenges your brother, someone else's cousin avenges their cousin, and within a month the original disagreement about a pig has developed military implications. The king has an interest in preventing that. Royal law increasingly tries to regulate violence, theft, oath-taking, church protection, public order, and the obligations people owe one another. Alfred's later law code will combine Christian principles with earlier West Saxon and Kentish traditions, presenting law as inherited wisdom rather than simply the king improvising punishments whenever annoyed. Even a king benefits from saying that the rules existed before Tuesday. Punishment varies. Compensation may be required. Property may be forfeited. Serious offences can bring severe penalties. Outlawry is particularly frightening because protection by law and community is enormously valuable in a society built around those relationships. To be pushed outside them is not merely social embarrassment, it can be dangerous. So when you attend an assembly, you are watching more than legal procedure. You are watching society remind itself how society works. People speak, oaths are sworn, claims are challenged, compensation is negotiated, neighbours listen very carefully. And once the matter is settled, everyone returns home with the comforting knowledge that justice has been done. or at least that enough people have agreed on one version of events to move on. 18. Christianity organises your week, your year, and the fate of your soul. By 878, Wessex is thoroughly Christian, and religion is not a private hobby you fit around ordinary life. It structures ordinary life. Churches, priests, monasteries, saints' days, fasting, feasts, prayer, baptism, marriage, burial, sin, penance, and the expectation of judgment after death all shape how the world is understood. The supernatural landscape is Christian, but does not necessarily become intellectually neat overnight. Older customs, local beliefs, charms, traditions, and anxieties coexist with official teaching because human beings rarely replace one complete mental universe as efficiently as updating software. You attend worship. You hear scripture and sermons in forms available to you. Bells, where present, can organize communal awareness. The church marks time in a world without wristwatches. God is everywhere, which is useful because apparently the Vikings are as well. Sunday matters. It interrupts the working rhythm of the week and draws people toward worship, although the exact experience depends on where you live and what sort of church is available nearby. You are not necessarily entering the enormous stone parish church that later centuries will plant in almost every English village. Many churches are smaller, simpler buildings, and some may be associated closely with estates, monasteries, royal centres, or local communities. Inside, the service is not designed around your personal comprehension. Latin remains the language of much formal worship and scripture, while preaching and explanation can bring Christian teaching into the vernacular world you actually speak. You may not understand every word being said at the altar, but you understand the structure surrounding it. You stand, you listen, you pray, you know when something solemn is happening. The church also gives the year a rhythm beyond agriculture. Feast days interrupt ordinary work. Fasting days alter what can be eaten. Major Christian festivals provide moments of worship, gathering, food, and celebration. Christmas and Easter are not simply dates on a calendar. They are religious landmarks around which communities organize expectation. This is useful because your normal calendar is otherwise heavily dominated by questions such as whether the barley is ready. The saints give you more things to remember. Particular saints may be associated with churches, relics, stories, protection, healing, and feast days. Their lives are told as examples of faith and endurance, although some saintly biographies contain enough miraculous events to make an ordinary farmer feel that his own spiritual career has been disappointingly quiet. You have successfully repaired a fence. St. Cuthbert has been communicating with seabirds. There is always someone doing better. Monasteries occupy an especially important place in the religious landscape. They are centres of worship, learning, landholding, manuscript production, hospitality, and royal connection. They can also become very wealthy, which explains why Scandinavian raiders have shown such sustained professional interest in them. A monastery contains exactly the combination a raiding force appreciates: valuable objects, food stores, livestock, relatively limited enthusiasm for armed confrontation. By Alfred's lifetime, decades of Viking attacks have damaged religious communities across Britain. Monasteries have been raided, abandoned, disrupted, or placed under enormous pressure. For ordinary people, this is not simply a cultural tragedy happening to men who own books. The church is woven into local life. Priests baptize children. They witness marriages. They pray for the sick. They hear confessions and impose penance. They bury the dead. And burial matters enormously because death is not understood as the end of administration. Your soul continues. Judgment waits. Heaven and hell are not metaphors deployed for atmosphere. They are realities within the Christian worldview. This makes moral behaviour serious in a very literal sense. Sin can require penance. Wrongdoing damages not only relationships between people, but your relationship with God. Prayer, charity, fasting, confession, and good works therefore have consequences beyond reputation. You are managing eternity, which feels like quite a lot alongside maintaining the pigs. Religion also follows you into moments of uncertainty. Illness brings prayer. Danger brings prayer. Travel can bring prayer. Bad weather, failed crops, childbirth, warfare, and sudden death all exist in a world where divine protection feels immediate and necessary. In 878, with Alfred's kingdom under extraordinary pressure, that need is particularly sharp. You may not know where the king is. You may not know how close the enemy is. You may not know what next month looks like. But the priest still prays. The feast days still come. The dead are still buried. Children are still baptized. And when darkness settles over the settlement, you can at least believe that somebody more powerful than Alfred is still paying attention. 19. Death is familiar enough that nobody can pretend it. Is an administrative error. Religion matters partly because death is much harder to keep politely out of view. Infant mortality is high. Infections can become dangerous. Accidents involving tools, animals, fire, childbirth, farming and violence have consequences that modern emergency medicine would normally interrupt. You know people who have died young because everybody does. Burial is a communal and religious act, increasingly centered upon Christian cemeteries and sacred space. Grief is no less real because death is more familiar. Parents do not love children less because childhood is dangerous. Husbands do not shrug because wives die in childbirth. Familiarity changes expectation, not affection. This is worth remembering whenever the medieval world is described as emotionally tougher. People were not harder material. They simply had fewer ways to stop terrible things once those things began. A fever can become serious very quickly. A cut that seems minor can become infected. A broken bone may heal badly. A difficult birth can turn from ordinary labour into catastrophe with almost no warning. A child who develops a severe illness cannot be driven to a hospital because hospitals in anything resembling your sense of the word do not exist. There is care. There are remedies. There are people with experience of wounds, herbs, childbirth and sickness. What there is not is antibiotics quietly waiting in a cupboard. This makes illness frightening in a different way. You can do everything people around you know how to do and still watch somebody become worse. And because households are crowded, infections can move through families with uncomfortable efficiency. One person begins coughing, then another. Then a child develops a fever. Nobody announces an outbreak. The household simply becomes quieter. Childbirth carries its own dangers. Women help other women through labour using practical knowledge accumulated through generations, and most births end with mother and child alive. Humanity has, after all, managed to reach 878. But when something goes wrong, options are terribly limited. Heavy bleeding cannot be replaced with donated blood. A dangerous obstruction cannot be resolved by modern surgery. Infection after birth cannot be met with antibiotics. So pregnancy and birth sit within ordinary family life while carrying risks everyone understands. The same is true of childhood. A family may have several children precisely within a world where not every child survives to adulthood. Archaeological cemeteries preserve that reality, with a bluntness written records often do not. Small graves sit beside adult graves because communities buried their children with care. There is nothing casual about that. When someone dies, the body is prepared for burial according to Christian custom and local practice. By Alfred's period, burial without elaborate grave goods has become common in Christian communities, and church-associated cemeteries increasingly shape where the dead are laid. The funeral brings people together. Prayers are said. The grave is filled. The dead person remains part of memory even after the practical work of the household has to continue. And that continuation matters. Animals still need feeding the morning after a funeral. The hearth still needs fuel. Grain still needs grinding. The cruelty of ordinary life is that grief receives no exemption from chores. There is also the matter of the soul. Death does not simply mean somebody has stopped breathing. Christian teaching places that person within a much larger story of judgment, salvation, resurrection, heaven, and punishment. Prayers for the dead and concern over one's own spiritual condition, therefore, carry enormous emotional weight. You are not merely hoping for a peaceful death, you are hoping for a good one. Sudden death can be especially frightening because it may arrive without confession, prayer, reconciliation, or preparation. This is one reason illness brings clergy close. A priest can pray, hear confession, offer spiritual comfort, and help prepare someone for what everyone understands may be coming. And then life closes around the empty space. Someone else sleeps where the dead person slept. Their tools may pass to another pair of hands. Their clothing is too valuable to disappear. Their tasks must be absorbed. The community adjusts because it has no alternative. That does not mean it forgets. By evening you pass the burial ground and know names beneath the earth. A child, a neighbour, someone's mother, someone who stood beside you last harvest. Death is ordinary in Alfred's England. Grief never is. 20. The priest can read, which makes him an entire information department. Now we arrive at literacy, and this is where the social gap becomes immediately obvious. Most ordinary people do not spend evenings reading. Literacy is concentrated among clerics and a limited number of elites, and much learned writing remains in Latin. Written documents matter in royal government, the church, learning, landholding, and memory. But oral communication remains enormously important throughout society. A literate priest or monk, therefore, possesses a skill with extraordinary reach. He can interact with texts that preserve law, scripture, letters, learning, calendars, and ideas from places you will never see. To you, a book is not disposable entertainment abandoned beside the bath. It is an expensive object produced through specialized labor from prepared writing surfaces and handwritten text. Someone dropping a manuscript into the bath would produce considerably more than mild irritation. Most of what you know has reached you through somebody's mouth. Your parents teach you. Older workers show you. Stories are repeated around the hearth. A priest explains religious teaching. A traveller brings news. A Lord's messenger arrives and announces something that suddenly concerns everybody. Memory is not simply useful in this world, it is infrastructure. If you cannot write down instructions, agreements, family histories, stories, prayers, and practical knowledge for everyone to consult later, people have to remember them. Communities become very good at carrying information through repetition. This does not mean nobody outside monasteries can read. Some nobles and royal officials possess literacy, and Alfred himself will become unusually committed to learning. But for the ordinary farmer, reading is not an everyday skill in the way recognizing crops, handling livestock, or repairing tools is. You do not need to read a manual about barley. The barley is standing directly in front of you. The priest occupies a different world. He may know Latin well enough to use liturgical books, scripture, prayers, calendars, and other ecclesiastical texts. Depending on his education and position, his knowledge may vary considerably. Not every village priest is a wandering university library centuries before universities exist. But even modest literacy gives him access to information most people cannot obtain directly. He knows when feast days fall. He can follow the church calendar. He may preserve records or interact with written instructions. He can communicate with larger religious networks. And when somebody produces a written document, he is among the limited number of people capable of making the mysterious marks begin speaking. This gives writing authority. A spoken promise depends on witnesses and memory. A written charter can preserve a grant of land, privileges, boundaries, or obligations beyond the lifetime of the people who originally witnessed it. Royal and ecclesiastical institutions, therefore, use documents precisely because human memory, though impressive, occasionally becomes strangely flexible when several acres of good farmland are involved. Books themselves are extraordinarily expensive. There is no paper mill producing cheap sheets by the ton. Manuscripts may be written on parchment made from prepared animal skins. Producing that writing surface requires animals, skilled preparation, scraping, stretching, drying, and cutting before a scribe has written a single letter. Then the writing begins. By hand, every page, every line, every decorated initial. If the scribe makes a mistake, there is no backspace key. There is disappointment. Ink must be prepared. Pens must be cut. Pages are gathered and bound. A substantial book can represent months of specialized work and significant material expense. So when Scandinavian raiders attack a wealthy monastery, the loss is not merely a few old books from a shelf. A manuscript can contain generations of labor and learning. And this helps explain part of Alfred's later anxiety about education. Warfare has not only damaged buildings and killed people, it has disrupted institutions that preserve knowledge. For now, though, you remain outside that literate circle. You hear the priest read. You hear him explain. You remember what matters. Then you go home and tell somebody else. There is no newspaper. There is no library card. There is no search bar. There is one man nearby who can read Latin. Try to stay on good terms with him. 21. Alfred has strong opinions about books. Although first he must keep his kingdom, Alfred's later reputation will become inseparable from education, learning, translation, and his desire to strengthen literacy among the people governing his kingdom. But in 878, the immediate agenda contains a rather more pressing item titled Do Not Lose Wessex. Viking warfare has disrupted monasteries, royal centres, networks of learning, and political stability across the English kingdoms. The world Alfred wants to rebuild has been damaged before he begins rebuilding it. This matters because his later educational programme is not simply a cultured king deciding that books are lovely. It grows out of a sense that knowledge, government, religion, and social order require deliberate restoration. Right now, however, your local farmer is probably less concerned with the king's future translation projects than whether anyone has seen his missing cow. History operates at several administrative levels. Alfred himself is unusually interested in learning for an early medieval king. According to the biography written by Asser, Alfred had loved English poetry from childhood and regretted that he had not received a stronger education when he was young. His ability in Latin developed later, which apparently troubled him considerably. There is something wonderfully familiar about this. You can become King of Wessex. You can fight Scandinavian armies. You can survive being driven into marshland. And somewhere in the back of your mind you are still annoyed that you did not study harder when you were 12. But Alfred's concern is larger than personal embarrassment. He looks around his kingdom and sees a shortage of educated clergy and officials capable of reading Latin well enough to make full use of the books on which the church and royal government depend. Warfare has made the problem worse. Religious centres have been disrupted, scholars have died or moved, institutions that once preserved learning have become weaker. A kingdom can lose knowledge surprisingly quietly. Nobody has to burn every book. You only need enough people to stop being able to read them. Later in his reign, Alfred will describe a time when learning had declined so far that relatively few people south of the Humber could translate a Latin letter into English. His solution is practical. If the people responsible for governing and teaching cannot all become brilliant Latin scholars overnight, then important works should be made accessible in English. So Alfred begins encouraging translation. Works associated with his programme include Gregory the Great's Pastoral Care, a handbook for bishops and spiritual leaders, along with other religious, philosophical, and historical texts. Alfred himself is traditionally associated with some of these translations, although modern scholars debate exactly how much wording came directly from the king and how much came from scholars working around him. Either way, the royal intention is clear. Useful knowledge should circulate. Alfred also gathers learned men around his court, including scholars from outside Wessex. Knowledge, apparently, must occasionally be imported like a particularly valuable piece of livestock, but none of this happens easily. Books are expensive, teachers are scarce. Parchment requires animal skins. Every manuscript has to be copied by hand. And teaching literacy takes time in a kingdom where many young men expected to serve the king also need to manage estates, fulfill military obligations, and generally participate in the ongoing project of preventing Wessex from disappearing. Alfred's educational ambition is therefore surprisingly modern in spirit and extremely medieval in execution. He wants capable administrators. He wants clergy who understand the text they use. He wants young men of sufficient means to learn to read English before moving on to Latin if they show ability. He wants knowledge to become part of strengthening the kingdom itself. Books, in other words, become another defensive structure, not as immediately useful against a spear as a shield, but considerably better for running the country afterward. And that distinction matters because Alfred is beginning to understand something larger. Winning one battle keeps Wessex alive today. Building institutions may keep it alive after he is gone. For now, however, that future remains painfully uncertain. It is still 878. Guthrum is still a problem. The kingdom still requires defending. And somewhere in Wessex, Alfred is dreaming about educational reform while several thousand armed Scandinavians continue refusing to respect his reading schedule. 22. Money exists, but much of wealth still has four legs or grows in fields. You do have money. Silver pennies circulate, royal coinage matters, and commercial exchange is very real. But it would be a mistake to imagine your economy as a smaller version of a modern cash economy. Land, livestock, food rents, obligations, labour, gifts, service, and agricultural production all carry enormous importance. Wealth is physical. You can see it grazing. You can stack parts of it in a granary. You can measure other parts in land, rights, followers, and things owed to you by other households. Coins are useful, particularly in trade and royal systems, but an ordinary person's economic security remains closely connected to resources that mice, weather, disease, thieves, or a badly placed Viking army can destroy. Your investment portfolio contains livestock. Diversification means owning sheep as well. The penny is the important coin of Alfred's world, struck in silver and carrying royal authority in a very literal form. Surviving examples from Alfred's reign include silver pennies minted in Wessex. But possessing a coin is not the same thing as living in an economy where you use coins for every ordinary transaction. You do not wake up, purchase breakfast with contactless payment, buy a coffee on the way to the field, and receive a notification informing you that you have spent too much on barley again. Much of what sustains you never needs to pass through a coin purse. If you grow grain, that grain is wealth. If you own cattle, those cattle are wealth. If you have pigs fattening in woodland, wool waiting to be spun, cheese stored for winter, or rights to use valuable land, you possess things that can feed people, support production, satisfy obligations, or be exchanged. This is wealth with practical consequences. Your cow does not merely have a price. It produces milk. It may produce calves. Its hide has value. Eventually its meat has value. Most importantly, everybody looking at the cow understands that you own a cow. There is no need to open an investment app. The asset is chewing beside the fence. Land matters even more. Controlling productive land means access to crops, grazing, woodland, water, tenants, labour, and the annual flow of food and resources that land can provide. Powerful people therefore measure wealth, not merely by piles of silver, but by estates and the obligations attached to them. A lord may receive food rents and services from people occupying his land. That payment might involve grain, livestock, ale, honey, cheese, labour, or other useful produce. This makes taxation and rent wonderfully tangible. Nobody sends you an email. Someone eventually arrives expecting food. Royal government works within the same physical world. Kings need resources because kings maintain households, reward followers, support religious institutions, receive guests, travel, and most inconveniently of all, fight wars. Armies consume enormous quantities of food. A warrior requires feeding even while accomplishing absolutely nothing. A horse is worse. So political power rests partly upon the ability to gather resources and move them toward the people currently carrying spears on your behalf. Coins help make larger exchanges possible, and Anglo-Saxon England already had a significant controlled coin economy before Scandinavian settlement transformed parts of it further. But silver remains only one part of a much broader economy built upon land and production. And silver itself must be protected. A coin can be hidden. Grain cannot hide particularly well. Livestock is even worse at it. If raiders appear, your wealth may begin running around making frightened noises. This is one reason warfare is economically devastating even when nobody burns your house. An army can consume stored food, seize animals, interrupt farming, prevent trade, and remove the labour needed for harvest. You may survive the raid and still spend the next winter paying for it. So when you look around your household, you see wealth everywhere. The grain chest, the sheep, the ox, the tools, the stored cheese, the field outside. Very little of it looks glamorous. All of it matters. In 878, being wealthy does not necessarily mean having a large pile of money. Sometimes it means having 12 cows, which is excellent right up until the 12 cows discover an open gate. 23. The market is your shopping centre, news feed, and rumour exchange. Eventually you need something your own household cannot make, which brings us to exchange and markets. Local and regional trading networks connect communities to craftsmen, merchants, food producers, metal workers, potters, salt, tools, cloth, ornaments, and goods that have travelled surprising distances. 9th century England is not isolated from the wider world. Rivers and coastal routes move goods efficiently, and important trading settlements link Britain into networks stretching across the Channel and beyond. For you, however, the market also performs another essential service. It contains people. People bring information. Somebody has heard that a lord is travelling. Somebody knows grain prices elsewhere. Somebody has a cousin who has seen armed men moving along a road. Somebody knows exactly what happened in the next settlement and is wrong in 6 important details. Social media has not been invented. Gossip is coping remarkably well. A market day, therefore, feels different from an ordinary morning. People arrive from surrounding settlements carrying things worth exchanging or selling. Grain may appear in sacks. cheese, butter, livestock, hides, wool, pottery, tools, wooden goods, and other useful items move through the crowd. A smith may have ironwork you cannot produce yourself. A trader might offer salt, which is not glamorous until you remember that preserving food without it becomes considerably more complicated. Salt is 9th century refrigeration equipment. You suddenly respect salt. Some goods have travelled much farther. Imported metalwork, glass, wine, fine cloth, jewellery, or luxury objects may pass through major trading centres, especially into the hands of wealthier buyers. Coins can change hands, but barter, obligations, and negotiated value still exist alongside cash. This means prices are not printed neatly beneath everything. You ask, you bargain, you compare, you attempt to look as though you do not particularly want the thing you have walked several miles specifically to obtain. Commerce has discovered emotional concealment remarkably early. Livestock creates its own theatre. A pig is not a compact product, neither is a cow. Animals move, complain, resist, become distracted, and occasionally demonstrate why buying something with 4 independent legs introduces problems unknown to modern retail. You inspect them carefully. Teeth can suggest age. Condition matters. Health matters. Temperament matters, especially if you are about to spend the next several years standing behind the animal while it pulls agricultural equipment. A bad purchase can continue disappointing you every morning. The market also attracts specialists. Craftspeople are valuable because nobody can master every useful skill. You may repair simple household items yourself, but producing quality metalwork, fine jewellery, specialised leather goods, or certain pottery requires knowledge and tools that ordinary households do not necessarily possess. The smith is especially important. Iron tools keep farms functioning. Knives cut, axes chop, plough fittings endure enormous strain. Weapons matter in a kingdom currently discovering exactly how useful weapons can be. If the smith tells you a repair will take time, you do not leave a furious review. You wait. He owns the forge. But the real commodity moving through the market is information. People talk while they trade. They ask where you came from. They ask how the harvest looks. They ask whether the road is safe. They mention a marriage, a death, a dispute, a merchant who has arrived from somewhere distant, a priest who has heard something from another priest. And in 878, military news matters enormously. Have the Danes moved? Has Alfred gathered men? Has a settlement submitted? Is the rumour from Chippenham true? The problem is that information improves as it travels only in the imagination of the person repeating it. By the 3rd retelling, 40 warriors have become 400. By the 5th, Alfred has either won a magnificent victory or died twice. You listen anyway. There is no better option. By afternoon, you begin walking home carrying whatever you managed to obtain, and several pieces of information you did not ask for. You have salt, a repaired knife, possibly a chicken, an absolute certainty that something important is happening somewhere to the east. Tomorrow, someone will ask what you heard at market. You will tell them. Naturally, your version will be much more accurate. 24. Travel means tracks, rivers, horses, and an extraordinary amount of walking. If the news concerns somewhere farther away, getting there is another matter. Most movement is limited by the speed of human feet, horses, carts, and boats. Roman roads still influence parts of the landscape, but there is no universal network of smooth-maintained highways carrying comfortable suspension vehicles between service stations. Local tracks respond creatively to rain. Rivers can be useful highways. Coastal travel can be faster than struggling overland. Horses provide speed for people who have them, while carts move goods at a pace that encourages philosophical reflection. Distances that feel trivial in a car become meaningful decisions when every mile has to be physically crossed. This also means information moves slowly. Your understanding of the wider political situation may be days or weeks behind reality, which is unfortunate because reality currently contains an unusually mobile Scandinavian army. For most ordinary journeys you walk. This is not considered exercise. Nobody announces that they have managed 10,000 steps before lunch and looks pleased with themselves. Walking is simply what happens when your body needs to be somewhere else. You walk to fields. You walk to church. You walk to neighbouring settlements, woodland, grazing land, wells, markets, and wherever else the day's work requires. The important difference is that the road beneath you is rarely designed for comfort. Some major routes follow old Roman roads, whose astonishingly durable foundations can remain useful centuries after the officials responsible for them have vanished. Bridges and causeways exist in important places, and rulers have reasons to care about routes because armies, messengers, traders, and royal officials all need to move. But once you leave the better routes, travel becomes much more local. A track may simply be the route generations of feet, hooves, and cartwheels have established because it goes where everyone needs to go. In summer, it can become hard and dusty. In winter, it becomes something closer to a prolonged disagreement with mud. Carts make the situation more interesting. A wooden cart carrying grain, timber, barrels, or household goods is extremely useful because otherwise those things must be carried directly by people or pack animals. But carts require animals, harness, workable tracks, and wheels that remain committed to being wheels. A deep rut can stop everything. A broken axle can transform a journey into an outdoor woodworking project, and no recovery vehicle is coming. If you are wealthier or travelling on urgent business, a horse changes the calculation considerably. Mounted messengers can move information much faster than somebody walking. Kings and nobles depend on this. Alfred cannot govern a kingdom by personally wandering from village to village asking whether anyone has seen the enemy. Messages have to travel. Orders have to reach local leaders. Men have to be summoned. Reports have to return. The entire political system therefore moves at the speed of animals, roads, weather, and exhausted human beings, which means there is always delay. By the time you hear that something happened, something else may already have happened afterward. Rivers offer another solution. Boats can carry people and heavy goods much more efficiently than dragging everything over poor tracks. England's rivers and estuaries, therefore, connect settlements rather than simply separating them. The sea matters even more. Coastal travel and trade can move goods considerable distances, and Scandinavian warriors understand this perfectly. Their ships allow them to move quickly along coasts and waterways, carrying armed men into places that may have received very little warning. This is one reason Viking warfare feels so unsettling. The roads slow you down. The rivers speed them up. You might hear that a force was somewhere several days ago and have no reliable idea where it is now. Travel after dark adds another difficulty. There are no streetlights between settlements, no reflective signs, no glowing petrol station visible in the distance. Once daylight fades, the landscape becomes genuinely dark. Woods, marshes, rivers, and uneven tracks are harder to navigate, so journeys are usually planned around available light unless urgency demands otherwise. You therefore learn distances differently, not in miles alone. In time, how long to the next settlement? Can you reach it before dark? Is there somewhere to stay? Can the horse manage it? Is the river passable? Has anyone heard whether the road ahead is safe? You leave home knowing roughly where you are going. Hours later, your feet hurt, your cloak is damp, and somebody has informed you that the bridge ahead is unusable. The 9th century has invented travel disruption. It simply has nowhere to complain about it. 25. The Viking problem has stopped being something that happens somewhere else. And now we need to talk about the Vikings, because by 878 they are no longer mysterious raiders, appearing briefly on coastlines before disappearing with church silver. Large Scandinavian armies have been operating in England for years, conquering kingdoms, occupying territory, demanding settlements, moving between fortified bases taking supplies, and reshaping the political map. Northumbria has fallen, East Anglia has fallen, Mercia has been broken apart, Wessex remains. For an ordinary person, this does not mean you wake every morning while dramatic music plays and 3 longships appear behind your chicken coop. Months may pass in normal work, but warfare exists as a persistent possibility. News of armies alters movement, trade, taxation, food supplies, military obligations, and where people believe it is safe to sleep. The horizon has become politically interesting. The change has been happening for years. Earlier, Viking attacks were often raids. Ships appeared, vulnerable places were struck, valuables and captives were taken, and the raiders departed. Terrifying, certainly, but recognisable as something that might pass through. The armies of Alfred's lifetime are different. From the middle of the 9th century, Scandinavian forces begin remaining in England for extended campaigns. They winter here, they seize settlements, they take horses, they negotiate payments. They overthrow kings and install arrangements that suit them better. They are no longer visiting. They have unpacked, Northumbria has already experienced this brutally. York was captured in the 860s, rival Northumbrian kings were killed, and Scandinavian power became established there. East Anglia followed. Its king, Edmund, was killed during the fighting, later becoming remembered as a Christian martyr. Mercia, once one of the dominant powers in England, has been forced into submission and division. Its king, Burgred, has been driven overseas. So, if you live in Wessex in 878, you do not need a monk to explain the general pattern. Kingdoms have been disappearing, and yours is next on the list. The men arriving are not one single permanent national army called the Vikings. They are shifting Scandinavian war bands and armies led by different commanders, combining, dividing, campaigning, settling, and making agreements according to circumstance. To you, this distinction may feel slightly academic when several hundred armed strangers require food, because armies need enormous quantities of it. This is where warfare enters ordinary life, even when the battle itself is nowhere nearby. Warriors eat grain. They require livestock. Their horses require fodder. They need shelter, equipment, transport, and supplies. An army passing through agricultural country can consume resources that local households expected to survive on for months. And if those supplies are taken rather than purchased, the military problem becomes your winter problem. A missing cow is food gone. A burned storehouse is winter grain gone. Men summoned to fight are labour gone. A field left untended because everyone fled is next year's harvest damaged before the seed is even in the ground. War spreads outward from battlefields through hundreds of small absences. There is also the question of movement. You begin listening more carefully when strangers arrive from another settlement. Which road did they use? What did they see? Are armed men nearby? Has a local lord called out his followers? Has anyone heard from the king? You may decide not to attend a market because the route feels unsafe. Traders may avoid an area. Families may move livestock away from exposed places. Valuable objects can be hidden. Nobody has an emergency alert system. You have rumours and a neighbour who claims his wife's cousin saw horsemen. Unfortunately, that may be the best intelligence available, and still the ordinary work continues. This is perhaps the strangest part. The cow needs milking whether Guthrum exists or not. Bread needs making. Children need feeding. A damaged fence remains damaged. Most days are not battles. They are days lived beneath the possibility of battle. Then somebody comes quickly along the road. People stop working. The traveller has news. The army has moved again. And suddenly the place you had been calling safely far away yesterday feels considerably closer today. 26. The Fyrd can turn your farming week into military service with very little notice. If you are a free man of the appropriate status and obligation, the king's wars are not entirely somebody else's career. Anglo-Saxon rulers can summon fighting men through systems of military service that draw upon local communities and aristocratic followings. The exact organisation changes across time and place, and Alfred will later reform the military structure substantially, but the basic problem is already obvious. Armies require ordinary economic life to stop producing farmers and start producing soldiers. That is difficult when the same men are needed to defend the kingdom and harvest the kingdom. You cannot simply keep everyone mobilised forever because armies eat constantly and fields respond poorly to patriotic speeches. So when the call comes, you take whatever military equipment your position requires and leave work behind. Your barley is now responsible for itself. The word usually used for this military levy is the Fyrd, although you should resist imagining a neat National Reserve force with uniforms, identification numbers, and somebody in Winchester maintaining everyone's annual training records. This is the 9th century. Organisation is considerably more personal. The king depends upon nobles and local leaders, who themselves command networks of followers and men owing service. Landholding and military obligation are closely connected, and refusing a legitimate summons can have serious legal consequences. Military service was already embedded in West Saxon law before Alfred, while the more elaborate defensive arrangements associated with Alfred belong especially to the years after the crisis of 878. For you, the practical result is beautifully simple. Someone important says men are needed. You stop what you are doing. If you possess the required status and equipment, you prepare to go. A basic fighting man needs a spear and shield. Better equipped warriors may possess swords, helmets, and protective equipment, but fine weapons are expensive objects. The beautifully furnished warrior buried with an impressive sword is not representative of every nervous farmer standing in a shield wall wondering how his morning became this complicated. The spear is practical. It requires less iron than a sword. It can thrust. It can be thrown in some circumstances. And, most importantly, it gives you a little distance between yourself and the man who would also prefer to put a spear into you. The shield is equally important. You carry it because early medieval battle is often fought at frighteningly intimate range. Men form together, shields overlap or press close, spears project forward, and suddenly warfare becomes less about heroic individual swordplay and more about standing beside several neighbours, while everybody tries very hard not to be the first gap in the line. There is no cinematic slow motion, there is shouting, wood striking wood, metal, mud, fear, and the distinct possibility that the man beside you was helping repair your fence last week. That social connection matters. The army is not filled entirely with strangers. Men can arrive grouped through local communities and lordly followings. You may know the people around you. This can be reassuring. It also means that if you run away, everybody back home may hear about it. Motivation has many forms. Then there is the enormous problem of keeping the herd in the field. Every man fighting is a man not ploughing, harvesting, repairing buildings, supervising livestock, or producing something at home. An army also has to eat from the same agricultural economy it temporarily interrupts. This is why prolonged campaigning is so difficult. Alfred will later reorganize his forces so that portions of the available manpower can serve while others remain home, an attempt to maintain defence without completely emptying the countryside of working men. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes this rotational arrangement during the later wars of the 890s, not as something already fully operating during the crisis of 878. Right now you are living through the problem that helps make such reform necessary. The Danes move quickly. Your farming calendar does not. A summons can arrive during work that cannot sensibly wait. Perhaps the hay needs gathering. Perhaps grain is approaching harvest. Perhaps an ox is lame. None of this impresses the king's messenger. The kingdom is in danger. You look at the field. You look at your spear. You look back at the field. The barley offers no strategic advice. So you leave. Someone else will have to keep the household running until you return, assuming you return. And that is the uncomfortable truth beneath Alfred's victories. Every army gathered on a famous battlefield is also a collection of ordinary households temporarily missing somebody important. History calls out the third. Your family calls it losing a pair of hands at the worst possible time. 27. Chippenham falls and suddenly the king is having a very bad January. Then, early in 878, the crisis arrives. Guthrum's forces strike at Chippenham, where Alfred has been staying, and the attack catches the West Saxons at an exceptionally vulnerable moment. Much of Wessex is overrun or submits. People flee. Others make terms. Alfred escapes with a small following into the Somerset marsh country. From the perspective of later history, you know he eventually wins. From the perspective of somebody living through these days, you know absolutely nothing of the sort. The king has disappeared from the political centre. An enemy army occupies an important royal base. Messages arrive unevenly. Families begin making decisions based on incomplete information. This is the point at which history stops looking inevitable and starts looking like several frightened people asking whether anyone knows where Alfred has gone. The timing makes it worse. The attack comes in the depths of winter, shortly after Christmas, when campaigning is less expected and households are already living from stored supplies. Armies are supposed to have some respect for seasonal inconvenience. Guthrum has apparently declined. Chippenham is a royal estate and an important place for Alfred. By striking suddenly, the Scandinavian army achieves something years of fighting have not managed. It breaks the immediate structure around the king. Alfred does not march grandly away beneath banners while trumpets announce a strategic withdrawal. He escapes. That distinction matters. Later generations will know him as Alfred the Great, which makes everything he does acquire a comforting glow of destiny. But nobody living through January knows the adjective is coming. For all you know, Alfred is finished. And there are reasons to think so. Northumbria has already fallen to Scandinavian armies. East Anglia has fallen. Mercia has been forced into submission. Kings have been killed, expelled, or reduced to arrangements made under Scandinavian power. Now Wessex appears to be following them. Some West Saxons flee overseas. Some submit to Guthrum, others wait. That last group is probably larger than heroic storytelling likes to admit because ordinary people have households to protect. If armed men control the region around you and the king cannot currently protect you, loyalty becomes a complicated subject. You might love Alfred dearly. You still have children, a farm, stored grain, livestock that is spectacularly poor at political resistance. So when a local lord makes terms, you may make them too. This is not cowardice so much as survival being extremely persuasive. News spreads slowly and unevenly. One traveller says Alfred escaped. Another says he has gone abroad. Someone has heard he was killed. Someone else insists he is gathering an enormous army. Nobody has evidence. Everybody has confidence. Your settlement becomes a rumour exchange conducted beside a hearth, and every new arrival causes conversation to stop. The military uncertainty affects ordinary decisions immediately. Do you travel to market? Do you move animals somewhere safer? Do you hide valuables? Do you send relatives away? Do you trust the road? Do you believe the man who claims the Danes are 2 days away when yesterday he said they were already here? There is no map showing coloured arrows, no daily bulletin, no reassuring official statement from the palace because the palace is part of the problem. Somewhere in the confusion, Alfred moves into the wet country of Somerset with a reduced following. The surviving sources give only glimpses of this desperate period, which means later imagination has filled it with famous stories. Most famously, there will eventually be cakes. But those come from much later tradition. The reality is dramatic enough without pastry. Your king is hiding in marsh country while much of his kingdom has collapsed around him. Winter fields lie quiet. Smoke rises from farmhouses. People continue feeding animals and grinding grain because ordinary life cannot wait for historians to determine whether the kingdom still exists. January passes slowly. Nobody knows what comes next. For the moment, Guthrum has Chippenham. Alfred has a swamp. And if you are betting on which of those positions looks more promising, the swamp is not currently attracting much money. 28. Athelney is a marsh, a refuge, and an extremely unpromising royal headquarters. Alfred ends up around Athelney in the Somerset levels, surrounded by wetlands that offer protection precisely because moving through them is awkward. This is not the shining palace from which you would expect a future national hero to organise the recovery of a kingdom. It is difficult country of waterways, marsh, islands of firmer ground, reeds, dampness, and local routes that matter enormously if you know them, and become traps if you do not. Alfred establishes a fortified refuge there and begins operating against the occupying forces. Later legend will add the famous story of the burnt cakes, which appears in written form centuries after Alfred's lifetime, and should therefore be treated as a wonderful story rather than CCTV footage. Still, the underlying situation requires no embellishment. Your king has been reduced to conducting resistance from a swamp. Morale is having a complicated winter. Athelney works because it is inconvenient. The Somerset levels are a low, wet landscape threaded with rivers, marshes, reed beds, flooded ground, and small areas of higher land. To someone who knows the local routes, this can be navigated. To an army unfamiliar with them, it is an excellent place to lose footwear, horses, patience, and eventually the will to continue. The landscape becomes part of Alfred's defence. There is no enormous stone fortress rising above the marsh. Those belong to another phase of English military architecture. Instead, Alfred's refuge is protected partly by earthworks, water, difficult approaches, and the fact that reaching him requires understanding a landscape that seems deliberately designed to discourage visitors. It is less Windsor Castle, more heavily defended damping convenience. Local people matter enormously. Alfred cannot survive in Athelney by royal dignity alone. His followers need food, shelter, information, weapons, boats, horses where useful, and people who know how to move through the levels. That means somebody has to supply them. Grain still has to arrive. Animals still need slaughtering. Clothes need drying. Weapons need maintaining. Messages need carrying. Even a resistance movement has domestic chores. And imagine what this looks like from your point of view if you live nearby. For years, Alfred has been king. Now he is somewhere among the marshes with a small band of followers, depending on communities that normally worry more about cattle than constitutional survival. Suddenly, your obscure corner of Somerset is involved in national politics. You did not apply for this. Information moves quietly. Who can be trusted matters. A rider arriving from the wrong direction attracts attention. A stranger asking too many questions becomes interesting. Local paths that usually carry farmers, fishermen, animals, and carts may now carry messengers moving between Alfred and supporters elsewhere. The marsh provides concealment, but concealment alone will not restore a kingdom. Alfred has to rebuild connections. He needs to know which nobles remain loyal, which districts can still raise men, where Guthrum's forces are, whether supporters will actually come when summoned. That requires communication across a kingdom whose normal political structures have just been badly shaken. And all of this is happening while Alfred's enemies presumably know he remains alive somewhere. The pressure must be immense. One mistake could reveal his position. One failed attempt to gather supporters could demonstrate that there are no supporters left to gather. One defeat could end the West Saxon royal line's practical control of the kingdom. The famous burnt cake story will later reduce this extraordinary period to Alfred being distracted while baking arrangements go badly. It is a charming legend. It also says something interesting about memory. People wanted to imagine the king reduced temporarily to ordinary domestic life, hiding in a poor woman's dwelling, failing at the simple task she gave him because his mind was occupied by the kingdom. Whether it happened or not, the story survives because the reversal is perfect. A king who cannot currently hold Wessex also cannot successfully supervise bread. For you, living nearby, the reality is less amusing. The kingdom feels suspended. Winter slowly begins to loosen. Paths change as water levels and weather change. Rumours arrive. Alfred is still there, still alive, still gathering support. The marsh that looked like the end of his reign is becoming something else. A hiding place, a headquarters, and, rather inconveniently for Guthrum, the place from which Alfred is preparing to come back. 29. Rumour is now the fastest thing in Wessex, and none of it comes with sources. For ordinary people beyond Alfred's refuge, information becomes its own problem. You do not receive a morning bulletin explaining that the king remains operational from a fortified position in Somerset and asks everyone to remain calm. News moves through messengers, travellers, clergy, local officials, traders, warriors, relatives, and people who know somebody who definitely spoke to somebody important. A single event can therefore arrive in several versions. Alfred is dead. Alfred is alive. Alfred has fled overseas. Alfred has an army. Alfred has no army. The Danes are coming tomorrow. The Danes have already left. Everybody speaks with the calm authority traditionally associated with people who know very little. Eventually, reliable instructions begin moving through trusted networks and local leaders. Until then, you are living inside the world's slowest emergency group chat. The problem is not that people are stupid. The problem is distance. If something happens 20 miles away, somebody has to physically bring the information to you. They walk, they ride, they travel by boat. They stop somewhere along the way, tell another person, and immediately lose control of the story. By the time it reaches your settlement, it has had a social life. A small skirmish becomes a battle. A band of warriors becomes an army. A lord who has not been seen for 3 days has obviously changed sides. A king who has vanished into marshland is either dead, victorious, captured, hiding in Ireland, or preparing an army so enormous that apparently nobody has noticed it except the man telling you about it. And there is no easy way to check. You cannot send a message to Chippenham. You cannot look at a map updated by somebody standing beside the battlefield. You cannot even assume that a traveller knows when the event happened. His news may already be several days old, and the army he describes may now be somewhere completely different. That is particularly dangerous because Scandinavian forces are mobile. A force can move along roads, rivers, and tracks faster than information spreads through some rural communities. So yesterday's reassuring report may be today's reason to move the livestock. People learn to evaluate sources instinctively. A royal messenger matters. A priest carrying information from another religious house may matter. A local thegn who has received direct instructions matters considerably. Your neighbour's brother-in-law returning from market with a dramatic story, and no identifiable witness requires more careful handling. Naturally, his story is the one everybody wants to hear. Markets become information exchanges. Church gatherings become information exchanges. Ale drinking becomes an information exchange with progressively lower standards of evidence. A traveller arrives, and suddenly 6 people are standing around him asking the same questions. Where have you come from? What did you see? Were there armed men? Whose men? How many? Where is Alfred? Nobody simply asks how the journey was. This constant uncertainty changes behaviour. You delay travel because the road ahead may not be safe. You hide silver because somebody has heard raiders are near. You move animals because a man from another settlement insists troops are coming. Then nothing happens. 2 days later, another messenger arrives saying the danger has passed. So you move everything back. Medieval crisis management involves a surprising amount of carrying objects in both directions. And underneath the rumours, Alfred is quietly trying to reconnect with the men who still owe him loyalty. Messages begin moving between the marshes and trusted supporters. Local leaders receive word. Meeting places matter. Timing matters. Secrecy matters. If Guthrum learns too early where Alfred intends to gather his forces, the entire recovery could collapse before it begins. So suddenly information is not merely useful, it is strategic. The right message reaching the right man can help restore a kingdom. The wrong message reaching the wrong man can destroy the attempt. For ordinary people, however, none of this arrives neatly. You hear fragments. You compare stories. You decide whom to believe. Then one morning the tone changes. The message is no longer that Alfred might be alive. The message is that Alfred is calling men to him, and for the first time in months, rumour begins turning into orders. 30. Eddington changes the future. Although you still have to finish the farming, by spring Alfred has gathered enough support to return openly. Men from Somerset, Wiltshire and Hampshire rally to him, and in May his army meets Guthrum's forces at Eddington. Alfred wins decisively. The defeated Scandinavian army retreats to its stronghold and is besieged until it agrees to terms. For the history books, Eddington becomes one of the defining moments of Alfred's reign. For you, the emotional effect is more immediate. The kingdom that seemed close to disappearing has survived. The political future has reopened. Men who marched away may return, although not all of them will. Communities have lost livestock, food, labour, property and people. Victory does not reset the countryside to the previous save file. There is still damage to repair. History has been saved. The fence remains broken. The remarkable part is how quickly Alfred's position has changed. Only months earlier, he was hiding among the Somerset marshes with a reduced following, while much of Wessex either submitted or waited nervously to discover who would still be king by summer. Now messages go out. Men gather. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, Alfred meets forces from Somerset, Wiltshire, and the part of Hampshire that remained beyond Scandinavian control at a place called Egbert's Stone. From there, the army moves onward before confronting Guthrum at Eddington. For the men answering that summons, this is not a historical turning point yet. It is a march. Your shield is heavy. Your spear is awkward. Your food has to be carried. You sleep wherever the army stops. And every mile takes you farther from the farm work that May has very inconsiderately continued producing. Then comes the battle. We do not have a neat tactical account telling us exactly where every group stood or precisely how Alfred arranged his line. What survives is the essential result. Alfred fights Guthrum's army. Alfred wins. The Scandinavian force is driven back. That simple sentence hides what battle actually means for the people standing inside it. Noise, fear, shields pressing together, spears appearing where you would very much prefer there not to be spears, men shouting names, commands, prayers, warnings. The ground beneath hundreds of feet becoming increasingly difficult. There is nothing clean about victory from close range. Later chroniclers can compress it into a sentence. You experience every minute. And then, somehow, the enemy line breaks. Guthrum's men retreat. Alfred's army pursues them to their fortified position where the fighting turns into siege. Now, another ancient military problem arrives. Everybody needs feeding. An army that has just saved Wessex still requires bread tomorrow morning. Food has to come from somewhere, which means the surrounding countryside continues carrying the burden of war even while people celebrate the result. After roughly 2 weeks, Guthrum's force agrees to terms. That is when everyone can begin believing the victory might actually hold. Men start thinking about home, and home has not been waiting politely. The fields have grown, animals have needed tending, repairs have been delayed. Someone else has been doing your share of the work, or your share simply has not been done. You return carrying whatever equipment you left with, perhaps thinner, dirtier, and much quieter than when you marched away. The household is relieved to see you. Then somebody mentions the fence. Of course they do, because this is the part heroic history rarely has space for. Alfred can defeat Guthrum. He cannot harvest your grain. He cannot mend your roof. He cannot replace the ox somebody lost during the chaos of winter. Victory prevents one disaster. Ordinary people still have to repair everything the disaster already touched, so the spear goes away. The farming tools come back out. The king has saved Wessex. You have hay to cut. 31. Guthrum gets baptized, which is apparently how international relations work now. The settlement after Edington produces one of the strangest scenes of the year. Guthrum, the Scandinavian leader who came terrifyingly close to ending Alfred's kingship, agrees to baptism. Alfred becomes his baptismal sponsor, and Guthrum takes the Christian name Ethelstan. Pause on that arrangement for a moment. A man invades your kingdom, drives you into marshland, fights you in a major battle, loses, and shortly afterward you participate in his baptism and enter a formal spiritual relationship with him. Early medieval diplomacy is nothing if not ambitious about conflict resolution. The agreement does not end Scandinavian power in England, and further warfare lies ahead, but it gives Wessex breathing room. Alfred has survived the greatest crisis of his reign. Guthrum has acquired a Christian godfather. Everyone has had an extremely busy spring. The sequence begins after Guthrum's defeated army retreats from Edington to its fortified position. Alfred follows. For roughly 2 weeks, the Scandinavian force remains under siege until hunger and circumstances make negotiation considerably more attractive than continued resistance. Guthrum gives hostages and promises to leave Alfred's kingdom, but there is another condition. He will be baptized. This is not simply Alfred becoming unexpectedly enthusiastic about Guthrum's spiritual well-being. Religion and politics are deeply intertwined. Guthrum's baptism creates a new kind of relationship between the two leaders. Becoming Christian allows him to enter political agreements through a framework Alfred understands and considers sacred, and Alfred does something even more striking. He stands as Guthrum's sponsor at baptism. In effect, Alfred accepts the man who nearly destroyed his kingdom into a ritual relationship resembling spiritual kinship. This is diplomacy conducted with holy water. Several weeks after the surrender, Guthrum comes to Alfred at Aller in Somerset, close to the marsh country where Alfred had hidden earlier that year. Guthrum is baptized there and receives the Christian name Ethelstan. Alfred acts as his sponsor. 8 days later, the ceremonial removal of the baptismal chrism takes place at Wedmore. Contemporary and near-contemporary accounts also describe Guthrum and his leading men, remaining with Alfred for a period afterward, receiving gifts and hospitality. Imagine attending that feast. Only weeks earlier, some of these men were trying to kill one another. Now someone is passing the ale. Nobody brings up January. This exchange of hospitality matters. Gift-giving is political language in Alfred's world. A king demonstrates status by giving generously, and accepting those gifts establishes relationships of obligation and honour. Peace is therefore not produced by signing 3 copies of a document while photographers stand nearby. It is performed. Oaths are made. Hostages are exchanged. Religion is invoked. Food is shared. Gifts pass between leaders. Everybody watches carefully. And for ordinary people in Wessex, the important result is simpler than any of this ceremonial symbolism. The army is leaving. Guthrum's forces eventually withdraw from Wessex. They move first towards Cirencester and later establish themselves in East Anglia, where Guthrum rules as a Christian king. The Scandinavian presence in England has not disappeared. Far from it. Large parts of the country remain under Scandinavian control, and Alfred will face more Viking attacks in the years ahead. But the immediate threat has changed. You can think about harvest rather than evacuation. Roads become somewhat less alarming. Livestock can remain where you put it, assuming the livestock agrees, and Alfred has gained something more important than one victory. Time. Time to reorganize defense. Time to strengthen fortified places. Time to rebuild royal authority. Time to prepare for the fact that the Scandinavians are almost certainly not going to conclude that invading England was an embarrassing phase and collectively take up gardening. For Guthrum, baptism also marks a genuine political transformation. He does not simply receive water on his head and immediately forget the entire thing. As ruler in East Anglia, he issues coins under his Christian name and governs within an increasingly mixed Anglo-Scandinavian political world. So the year that began with Alfred fleeing Chippenham ends very differently. His enemy has been defeated, his kingdom survives, and the man who nearly removed him from history has become his baptismal godson. There are easier ways to make new friends. The 9th century simply has not discovered them yet. 32. You go to sleep in a kingdom that has somehow survived the day. And finally, evening comes back to the household. The light fades quickly because there is no switch to postpone darkness. Work moves closer to the hearth, tools are put aside or repaired. Food is eaten. Ale may be shared. Someone tells a story that everybody has heard before and nobody interrupts because this is what stories are for. Clothing is checked, animals settled, doors secured as well as the building permits, and prayers said before sleep. Outside, the countryside becomes genuinely dark. No streetlights glow beyond the fields, no aircraft cross the sky, no distant motorway hums behind the trees. Somewhere beyond your settlement, Alfred is rebuilding his authority after a year in which his kingdom nearly vanished. Tomorrow you will wake, relight the fire, feed the animals, grind grain, repair things, carry water, work the land, and continue living. Wessex has survived 878. More importantly, somehow, so have you. But before sleep comes, the household has to close itself down. The animals are checked first because animals possess the remarkable ability to create emergencies whenever humans are tired. A gate is secured, a cow is looked over. Sheep are counted with rather more practical urgency than the sleepy version you are familiar with. Chickens settle wherever chickens have collectively decided is appropriate. Someone discovers that one is missing. Everyone looks around. The chicken is found approximately 12 feet away, behaving as though the search was unnecessary. Excellent. Now the humans can proceed. The hearth is reduced rather than abandoned. You do not want an energetic open flame spending the night unsupervised inside a timber building. But you also do not want to wake to a completely dead fire if embers can safely be preserved. So fuel is arranged carefully. Ash may be drawn around glowing embers. The fire settles. Its light changes from yellow flame to deep red, and the room begins shrinking around it. Without strong artificial light, evening naturally slows you down. Fine work becomes harder. There is less reason to keep pushing through another 3 hours of productivity because nobody has invented bright ceiling lamps or the strange modern belief that every hour must be optimized. You sit. You mend something simple. You listen. Conversation becomes the entertainment. Stories matter enormously in a society where most people do not read for pleasure. Family histories, local memories, religious stories, jokes, rumours, heroic tales, and accounts of things that definitely happened to somebody's grandfather circulate by being told again and again. The fact that everybody already knows the ending is not a problem. That is often the point. Familiar stories are comfortable. You know where they are going. After the year you have just experienced, this is a luxury. Because 878 has not been predictable. At the beginning of the year, Guthrum struck Chippenham. Alfred fled. Much of Wessex collapsed or submitted. For a while the kingdom looked finished. Then Alfred reappeared. Men rallied. Eddington was fought. Guthrum lost. Peace was made. And somehow the political structure that appeared to be disappearing in winter is still here at the end of the year. You may not understand the larger historical significance. You certainly do not know that later generations will call Alfred the Great. To you, he is simply the king who survived. That is enough. The household begins settling for sleep. Blankets are arranged. Children quiet down eventually, after demonstrating that children in every century consider bedtime negotiable. Someone coughs. Someone else says a final prayer. You hear the wind against the walls. The building creaks softly as timber cools. Beyond the doorway there is almost complete darkness. And darkness in the 9th century is not merely low light. It is absence. The moon and stars matter because nothing else is competing with them. If cloud covers the sky, the landscape beyond the house can disappear completely. No distant town glows orange. No farmhouse shines across the valley. No vehicle passes with headlights. The world simply ends at the edge of what the fire allows you to see. And strangely, after everything else, there is peace in that. You pull the blanket closer. The hearth settles. Tomorrow will contain mud, work, grain, animals, smoke, repairs, prayer, and probably another problem involving a fence. But tomorrow can wait. Wessex is still there. Your household is still there. The fire is still warm. For tonight, that is enough.